Okay. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to tonight's Planning, Building, and Environmental Committee meeting for the month of November. My name is Joanne Chichok, and I'll be chairing the meeting this evening. A note to all of you out there. First, if you would be all please so kind as to sign in the attendance sheet on the table at the exit doors. Marking your attendance here provides you with opportunities into the future if you wish to bring up an item in any other means other than a committee format. So I'll ask you now that regardless of your speaking, you should sign the forms at the doors. Number two, tonight's meeting, we are asking that all cell phones, pagers, and PDAs be turned off, as tonight's meeting is being audio and video recorded and will be available on the town's website no more than 48 hours after the close of tonight's meeting. So, with all that being done, I'm going to go to members of committee, and I guess before I go there, I should identify the fact that Mayor Joyner sends his regrets this evening. He is unable to join us. So, change in order of items on the agenda, members of committee. Seeing none, disclosure of pecuniary interest and/or conflict. Seeing none, I'll move on to one of the three public meetings for tonight. Our first public meeting is a zoning bylaw amendment submitted by Jerry and Paige Kielt. The Planning Act requires in Section 34 Sub 12 that before passing a zoning bylaw amendment, Council must hold at least one public meeting for the purpose of informing the public in respect of the amendment. The purpose of this meeting is to receive comments from the public and/or questions from the public regarding the amendment to the Township of West Lincoln zoning bylaw. At this point, no decision has been made on the proposed amendment, and any comments received will be taken into account by this committee and Council. The Planning Act requires through Section 34 Sub 13 that Council advise the public that if a person or a public body does not make an oral submission at a public meeting or make written submissions to the Township of West Lincoln before the bylaw is passed, the person or public body is not entitled to appeal that decision, the decision of Council for the Township of West Lincoln, to the Ontario Municipal Board. Madam Clerk, can you please advise of the method and dates on which public notice was given?
Proper notice was given by individual notice dated October 10th, 2017.
Thank you. I understand, Mr. Treble. We have you putting forward the position regarding this zoning bylaw amendment. Before we moved into the formalities of that, I understand this committee and all of the community would be happy to congratulate you on a new addition to your family. You've become a grandpa, and we're so happy for you, your wife, and the rest of your family. Congratulations.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This application, Madam Chair, is a rezoning application, as you have noted. Staff have prepared a technical report, which is in the council agenda for tonight. This technical report reviews some of the policy considerations and some of the details and nature of the application, and will be the basis upon which staff will bring back a recommendation report. The recommendation report will also take into consideration comments that are received from the public as a result of tonight as well. The property, Madam Chair, is located at 8234 20 Road and is in the ward of Caister. The property is 6.2 hectares, 15.3 acres in size, and the application is to change the zoning from agriculture A to an agriculture with exception zone. And it's to permit a business that's been operating on the property for the last couple of years. The business is referred to as D&G Property Pros and has between 6 and 8 employees and provides for landscape installation and maintenance services to urban and rural properties, and includes tree removal, pruning, hedgerow removal, lawn maintenance, hardscaping, and snow and ice management. There are a number of different policies that apply to lands within the agricultural area, and a number of these policy sets are required by the province through the provincial policy statement, and certainly the regional and township official plans are responsible for implementation of those provincial policies. So in an agricultural area, the main use should be an agricultural use, such as the raising of livestock or the growing of crops. But some value-added accessory type uses are permitted, and the terminology is agriculture value-added or on-farm diversified or home industry. Excuse me, Madam Chair. The use in its current situation does not comply with the required permitted uses for agricultural areas. And as a result, DNG Property Pros hired a planning consultant who is with us tonight. The planning consultant from the IBI firm will be able to speak to her planning justification report following my presentation, Madam Chair. So as mentioned, this is an application to change the zoning to an agricultural exception zoning to allow for the business to exist on the property. The business provides a service to the broader community, not just agricultural areas, and as I say, it has an employee base of some 6 to 8. Comments to date, although the report indicates there were no comments, 2 agency sets of comments are attached, those being the Conservation Authority, which have undertaken a review and have advised that they have no objections to the application in its current form. And also Regional Planning and Development Services have undertaken a review, and they have concluded that they do not oppose the proposed zoning amendment, but indicate that they require that we ensure the use is and remains secondary to a principal agricultural use of the property. The on-farm diversified use is limited in area, and the on-farm diversified use is compatible with and shall not hinder surrounding agricultural operations. In addition, Madam Chair, I'm aware that we have received 1 item of correspondence from a neighbor who resides at 2545 Range Road 1, and I understand, Madam Chair, he is in the audience and wishes to speak tonight as well. So perhaps with that, Madam Chair, I'll turn it back to you and we can hear from the agent for the applicant.
Thank you, Mr. Treble. Okay, speaking of that, is the applicant or the authorized agent here to address council? Come forward, please. If you'd state your name.
Good evening. Thank you. My name is Odette Gomes. I'm a planner with IBI Group, and I'm here representing the property owners of 8237 20 Road. Is this ready to go? Okay, so as was indicated, the property is approximately 6.2 hectares in size. There is an existing house and the existing barn, and the property owners operate the landscape business out of their home. There's also about 4 hectares of land that is currently rented to a farmer for the harvest of hay. So as was indicated, the proposal for the zoning bylaw amendment is to recognize the landscape business as a home industry. So the primary use is proposed for a tree farm and a nursery, so it would be the area that's in green. And then the landscape business is proposed as the on-farm diversified use, which would be the secondary use to the agricultural, and that's part of this area in here. And then the balance of the lands would be for the residential area. So just basically the tree planting and the nursery would be about 5.65 hectares of the property, which is about 91% of the total property. The residential portion would take up about 0.35 hectares of the property, which is about 6% of the entire property. And then the landscape business, as well as the storage for the agricultural, would be the remaining 0.2 hectares, which is about 3% of the entire property. So, and just to clarify, this area here is not just for the landscape business. So this is just a zoomed-in area of that area where the landscape business and the agricultural operation would utilize. So this area here is approximately 0.2 hectares in size. So again, the total of that is about 3% of the entire property. There is an existing building on the site, which is about 300 square meters. So approximately 50% of this area and 50% of the building would be dedicated to the landscape business, and then the balance of that area would be for the agricultural use. So this is for the storage of equipment, materials that would be dedicated to farming the tree farm and the nursery. So that would be the things required for planting the trees, for maintaining those trees, and for harvesting the trees. So that, at the end of the day, it's approximately 0.1 hectares or 1.5% of the total lands that we are dedicating to the landscape business. So the intent is to have the greenhouse and the trees in the ground by the spring. As I indicated, there is a contract with the local farmer for the hay, for the 4 hectares, but the owners are working with that farmer to remove that agreement so that in the springtime, as soon as the frost is gone, they can start the plantings. So the majority of the trees are going to be cedars with some ornamental trees as well. And the owners have been in contact with Forest Ontario, who are going to be supplying them with hardwood trees for the balance of the site. So the proposal is supported by the province. So the provincial policy defines agricultural uses to include the growing of crops, which includes the nursery and the tree planting. It also supports the proposed landscape business as an on-farm diversified use, as the proposed landscape business is the secondary use to the tree farm. So again, approximately 91% of the property is designated for the tree farm and the nursery, and approximately 1.5% of the entire property will be dedicated to the landscape business. The provincial policy also supports this proposal with respect to the criteria for on-farm diversified uses. So the landscape business is proposed on the farm. It is going to be secondary to the agricultural use. It is limited in areas. It is only 1.5%, and it is proposed as a home-based industry. It's also compatible with the area, and there should be nothing that's going to be introduced to this farm that will hinder any of the surrounding agricultural operations. The guidelines for agricultural uses of the PPS also clearly indicate that the landscape business is considered an on-farm diversified use when it is secondary to the primary use. So in this case, once again, the landscape business is a secondary use. Primary use is the planting of the trees and the nursery. So the proposed amendment is consistent with all the planning policies, and we're asking that the landscape business be recognized as a home-based industry. The farm and nursery will be the primary use of the land. The secondary use will be the on-farm diversified use, which is the landscape business. Only 1.5% of the total property is to be dedicated to the landscape business, and it is supported by all the local, regional, and provincial policies. So I thank you for your time, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you. I'm not really sure whether or not members of the committee would like to wait until later in the agenda to ask those questions, so I know you'll be available. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, this is the time for public submissions with regard to this application. Is there anyone wishing to address committee? Yes, I know there's one person. Okay, please come forward, state your name for the record, and the microphone is yours.
Hello, my name is Glenn Davis. I'm not professional, obviously, but I know that agricultural around my house basically is, you know, a farmer coming by, maybe harvesting the crop or planting, or you know, once, twice, 3 times a year. This next door to me is actually a business. It's a landscaping business. They're there every day. every day of every week for the whole year. So I hear their operation every morning. I wake up to their alarms. You know, I'm tolerant and everything like that, and I wrote down a bunch of stuff that it's just not professional enough, I guess it is. But I did take the time to write down things I did feel if you could take the time to read it, and it does pick apart some of the things that she had put up there. I don't see how this landscaping business can be secondary because it's the primary business. It's not the nursery. It's because they already have a business there. They don't have a nursery. The authority, the Conservation Authority told me that they did okay the building, but they cannot do anything with the land. If you're gonna put a greenhouse up there and you gotta start excavating that land, you excavate it just put plants, that's alternate land, and they said that that wouldn't happen, but I'm hearing different. So, you know, I really do, I feel it devaluates my land. I lose my quality of life there because I bought that house 20 years ago with plans that it was never going to be altered around there because I had the zoning to protect it. Now the zoning's going to be changed and I'm going to retire in 10 years and I'm looking forward to not this. You know, I just want my serenity there. I have my peace of serenity. I have the wildlife. It's a range, like this is a range. It's unique to the area. It's no boundaries. It's wide open forest and that brings in all kinds of wildlife. I get the grandchildren over there and they start playing around there and to look at the joy in their eyes and everything they experience is just like, wow, it's just a whole different atmosphere. And I really feel that atmosphere is going to be compromised if we put a business there. Because this is a business, it's a day-by-day operation, week by week, year after year. When the farmers come in, it doesn't happen that way. They come and they go and that's it, you know, and I have my serenity still, but I feel that I'm losing that. So I don't know what else I was supposed to say in there. I don't want to read it.
There's-
But,
What you're supposed to say is what you really want to say, so don't worry about being professional, just tell us what it is that you wanted to put forward.
Like I say, I got a hold of the Planning Act, and I went through it bit by bit, and I put my, you know, opposition to it. From what I seen, it wasn't really, didn't jive with me. So I didn't find it all that convincing, really, you know. I think it's kind of a shot in the dark. They went and put this building up, and then did the proper processes. I thought that we'd have to do the process and then kind of put the buildings up, you know. To me, it seems backwards. My neighbors have never communicated with me. I don't know what their real ideas are, what they're going to do in the future. Because once that zoning is changed, does it stay like that? If their business fails or something happens and they lose the business, now is it somebody else comes in and continues on with something totally different because the zoning's changed? You know, I have all these questions. I was hoping tonight that some would get answered, but it's just pretty repetitive of what I've read in the planning report.
Mr. Davis, this is your time to speak to the item, and this is kind of the place where we listen with open minds to all sides of it. Subsequent to this meeting, before council and committee make a decision, because this is a technical report tonight, there would be time, if the answers don't come out through either council teasing them out of the applicant or out of people from the public, you would have time to meet with the applicant to try and determine if your questions can be answered and if they really are concerns. So this isn't the end, this is the start, and this is where you bring out your concerns for the record. So,
Okay. And I do want to say, I believe in economics and everybody making a living. I don't like to restrict that from anybody, you know, but I've got some time spent here and a bit of investment too, you know, and it just seems to be going different now. So
I gotcha.
I suppose that I'm done.
Thank you. Did you have anything written out that in your presentation that you wanted to submit to the clerk, or was it just your verbal presentation?
Well, I written out a little verbal closure thing, but most of it's in the report that I put in already. I mean, I could hand this in too, the closing if.
If you like, you're more than welcome to submit it to the clerk. It's in, all of the rest of your information is in the agenda this evening, so, fine.
Okay. And that's
Thank you.
it. Okay, thank you for your time.
Thank you for coming forward. Are there any other members of the public wishing to come forward? I'll say it now, that this may be the only public meeting held with respect to this application. Therefore, if any members of the public would like to make comments and/or provide written comments, they should state them now or present them now, as the OMB may not consider comments made during any other council or committee meetings. Anyone wishing to speak are required to come forward to the microphone at this time. Seeing none, I'm going to confine the discussion to table and, pardon me, ask if any members of committee have questions, and I'll take a speaker's list if there's more than one. Councillor Rayner?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through you to Mr. Treble. Interesting things brought up by Mr. Davis. I'd like to get some more information from you with regards to that. Mr. Davis made the comment that there was a procedure normally you go through before you build. You don't build first and then go through the procedure. Was that correct? Do you know the exact procedures? Were those buildings put up after approval was granted, or were they put up after and then they were seeking approval?
Mr. Treble?
Through you, Madam Chair. The building in question has a building permit, and the building permit was issued based on the information provided to township staff at that time. Had township staff been aware that the building was being constructed for business purposes, then this process should have happened first. But that wasn't the information provided to planning staff and building staff as part of the permit application. So the process complied with the zoning according to the information provided, and hence a building permit was just issued, which is normal protocol in the event of compliance.
So it was an agricultural building, Councillor Rayner, and then it was discovered that it was not an agricultural building, and thus the rezoning.
Correct. So Mr. Davis was correct that the building was built on false pretenses, Mr. Treble?
Well, through you, Madam Chair, either the information changed following construction of the building and they decided to relocate the business here, or improper information was given. I don't know the answer to that question, but I do know that there is a business there now. When they decided to put the business there, I can't say for certain.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through to Mr. Treble once again. With regards to this building, how long has this building been up since application to change its original purpose been applied for?
Through you, Madam Chair, the building was constructed sometime in late 2016, I would think. Sorry, January 2016.
So obviously before the rezoning application, Councillor Rayner.
So obviously, Mr. Davis has some definite concerns that it appears that Mr. Treble has just justified to us. That's the first thing. Second question, if I may, Madam Chair, I know this is not normal procedure, but Mr. Davis mentioned that, I guess I don't need to go to Mr. Davis. Mr. Davis mentioned that he has lived there for 20 years. The purpose of living there was like a lot of us in the country. We enjoy the country, we enjoy the wildlife, we enjoy the quiet. That's why we go to the country. Through you to Mr. Treble. How long has these people owned the property next door to Mr. Davis?
Mr. Treble?
Sorry, Madam Chair, I'm just
That's okay.
going to grab the file, which I have buried very nicely. Through you, Madam Chair, the lands were purchased in February of 2016, according to the application. So the accessory building must have been built basically at that same time.
As soon as the property, through you, as soon as the property was purchased then?
It would appear that way, through you, Madam Chair.
Okay, so it appears that Mr. Davis had bought in an area that he thought was relatively quiet, or is quiet. He can enjoy the wildlife, and all of a sudden, dramatically, in the last year and a half, things have changed completely from what he bought for and what he expected and what he was hoping for in the future. Would that be a fair statement to say, Mr. Treble?
Well, through you, Madam Chair, things are possible to change in the agricultural area. Farmers have the right to build additional buildings, and uses could change even though they remain within an agricultural nature. And with that in mind, the provincial policy does allow for agricultural uses to have on-farm diversified or agricultural value-added components added to them. So as an example, if you were a soybean operator and you wish to process the soybeans into oil on your property, or if you were a chicken farmer and you wish to process and sell birds from the property, those kind of things are possible. But they are meant to be uses that are needed in the agricultural area and provide a service to the agricultural community generally, or supplement a farmer's income on the farm.
Through you, Madam Chair, to Mr. Trouble, but this is not supplementing. The price of soybean is not that high, and the farming activity, as Mr. Davis says, is spring and fall with a little bit of spraying in between in the summertime. But this business is 7 days, well, probably not 7 days a week, but at least 5 days a week, and the income from that business would probably far exceed the income from farming, because farming is something you usually don't go into to get rich real quick. So does it not appear that this business would probably be the primary, with agriculture being the secondary?
Through you, Madam Chair, I think I would agree with that statement, and for the following reason. The owner, as I indicated, based on the application, appears to have not lived there for very long, and from my understanding, rents the land out to an area farmer who takes a hay crop off the land. So from the way I've always interpreted the farming component, the person taking the risk would be the farmer, and that is certainly not the person that's renting the land out. That would be the person that's relying on a crop for his income, his or her income. So I would say that the farmer farming the 4 hectares is the farmer in this situation, and the owner of the land is simply a property owner trying to come up with an agricultural business to justify the existing landscaping business.
Through you, Madam Chair, to Mr. Trouble, how much land is being farmed?
I
4
understand 4 hectares.
4 hectares, multiply 2.47 acres per hectare times 4. This is like 10 acres of land. That's all you were talking about here?
Yes, sir.
That's
So
correct.
10 acres of land for farming, and you're saying that the primary business is farming, is absolutely 100% incorrect. There's no way in this world. I've been farming for 30-some odd years. That's absolutely physically impossible. The business has to be the primary. This whole thing does not look or smell good. Thank you.
Well, Councillor Rayner, remember, we're open to public meeting, and a
This is a
public meeting.
technical report, Madam Chair.
That's
and
right.
I know it will be coming back again, but there's...
But it also is a
there's
public
certain-
meeting where we're listening to all sides of it, so your points are taken, and I hear you.
Thank you.
Okay. Councillor Trombetta.
Thank you, Madam Chair. There's a couple questions. I wonder if the representative, the owner's representative
Certainly.
can come up. and
Oh,
maybe-
the owner?
if The owner's representative can come up.
Oh,
and-
that's Odette Gome from IBI.
Sorry,
I
Mrs.
even wrote
Gomes,
it
Mrs.
down.
Gomes. I do know the property really well. Sorry, through you, Madam Chair, to Mrs. Gomes. I do know the property really well. I don't, the only thing I'm not understanding is the intention for a nursery to be grown on the property, and then this is a property that's going to have customers to come get from, like pick up plants, or is this just the nursery for them to use on their own landscaping business? Is that the idea?
Yes, so the idea is for them to grow the trees and the nursery, and then to utilize those trees in for their landscape
So
business.
it's
So it's
not-
no on-site sales, so nobody will be coming there to purchase and take them away. So it'll just be to have their stock for their business.
See, thank you, and through you, Madam Chair, to Mrs. Gomes. Sorry, and unfortunately, the owners aren't here, but I guess I can speak through. But what concerns me is that, as a resident who actually lives down the street, I'm worried about these things turning up on every corner once one's approved. And every corner could have nurseries, and you know what I'm saying? So, like, that's one thing that does concern me. And I think I just need, and I'm glad this is the first meeting, but I think I just, that intention of just a nursery and then a landscaping business to subsidize it, what's going to happen on 5-acre properties or 3-acre properties in that sort of case? And I know you might probably not be able to answer that. You can't have a crystal ball like we have, like we don't have, right? So that's one thing that does concern me, especially being a resident of in Ward 1 as well. I'm worried about these 5-acre properties and 3 acres, 2 acres, 10-acre properties turning into multiple businesses all over the place, right? And obstructing the agricultural land that we do have. So, again, I know this is just a technical report, but I just wanted to feel that I had needed to instill my comments into this meeting. So, I'll leave it with, I think Mrs. Gomes like to add something else there.
I
so-
would if I
Yes.
could.
I
Sorry.
was waiting for you to finish
Sorry,
before I
I'm
direct.
finished up.
No problem.
Through you, Madam Chair, if I could just answer that. And I do respect the comments and I respect the concerns. I'm not sure if you're familiar with the Hamilton experience. So a few years ago, it was approved at the Ontario Municipal Board that they grandfathered 60 properties that had the same kind of issue. So they had landscape businesses that were operating on these farms, excuse me, and they were secondary uses again to the primary use. But they set, there's a set of criteria. So not just every farm anywhere can do it. So, and that's how you would control it. So some of the criteria was that it had to be, the farm itself has to be of a certain size, and a certain percentage of that farm has to be dedicated to the agricultural use. And so there is a very specific set of criteria, and that's basically how you control it. And that's what Hamilton has done, and there's over 60 properties, again, that have been grandfathered. And I did include that as part of my justification report and the OMB decision and all the details if you're interested in looking at it. And it's worked really well for the city of Hamilton. And we meet all that criteria. So in, again, the justification report, I did go through the criteria and how we meet all of those requirements. So we've kind of based it on an experience that has worked in a different municipality.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Gomes. Maybe you want to stay there because I have Councillor Bilsma next.
Okay.
Actually, no, you can sit down. I
Okay.
don't have any questions for you particularly.
Don't go away.
Yeah,
But go,
yeah.
please.
So Mike, I'm through you, Chair, to Councillor Rayner. I'm just going to take just a little bit of umbrance with the idea that 10-acre or 12-acre, 10-acre parcel of land
So
can't.
Councillor Bilsma,
Yeah.
I'm going to ask you to refrain from
No, but I-
cross-table discussions. If you want to put your points out there,
Okay.
please do.
I do believe that a farm of 10 acres in soybeans can't support a living of any meaningful amount. But precisely why an agricultural use from soybeans to something a little bit more intense can offer sufficient income that's qualified by, Revenue Canada
Sure.
as a farm. There are no shortage of fruit farms, for example. I worked on one, I grew up, a family was supported, and there were 3 employees, and it was 11 acres, and it was very intense, and that was all that they had in place. So I understand what the neighbor was saying about an agricultural use going from soybeans, which is quite pastoral and low input and then of course low output. To move to an agricultural use of trees or a small nursery, I understand that it might be busier because of course it's a little bit more intense. So at this point, I have no objection to a nursery going in. I think that that is the direction that we want our municipality to go, to more intensified uses on our lands. All around this municipality, we're looking at getting higher densities of houses and higher density of commercial properties and higher densities because the province is mandating that for us. They're saying that we need to get more jobs per hectare and more people living in per hectare. And that's driving the value of the land up, and so farms have to get more out of the acreages that they have. That 10 acres of prime agricultural land is going into a civiculture or a tree nursery, I think is great. And while I can respect that, perhaps it might not be the sole source. This property also has a home industry, which they fully acknowledge, and they're using the tree nursery to supplement the business by growing trees, so they don't have to pay another nursery for the wholesale prices of that. But they'll be able to return some of that investment. I think it's a wise move. I think it's the kind of move that's necessary in the market that we find ourselves here in southern Ontario to survive. There's a tightening of belts all the way around. I don't see a problem with the application. I'm very supportive of it because it's part of the clever entrepreneurial spirit that's necessary to make it in this in the business environment that we're in. That there's a home-based business on there. Again, it comes back to the idea that there might be some maintenance and some care given to the nursery stock, but generally speaking, as I understand it, landscapers go out in the morning and they do their business in the community, and they're basically looking for places to park their trailers securely at the end of the day, and do some maintenance on their equipment, and I really feel that that's ideal location for such a business. It's far more appropriate to have it there than close to residential properties where there's more intersections and possibly so having said all of that,
I knew
just
there'd
wanna
be a
ask-
question in here very
Yes,
soon.
I
Councillor
wanted to
Bilsma. I was
ask
waiting for
one
it.
final, I wanted to make a comment because this is the time to make comments.
No, actually, it isn't. At
It
the
isn't?
technical report, you're in a public meeting, you're listening to comments, you are open-minded until we finish the public meeting, and your decisions or your position is better stated at the technical
My
report.
question, thank you for coaxing that out of me, is this: is there something that initiated this report at this time, or is it just the progression? Like, was it initiated by a neighbor, or was it initiated by the owners themselves?
Through you.
Mr. Treble.
Through you, Madam Chair, the applicants were approached by Township Bylaw Enforcement staff as a result of a complaint.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay. Councillor Rayner.
Okay, Councillor Bilsma, that may be a little bit of a surprise to you. It was to me too, but anyways, what I was about to say was, Councillor Bilsma was referring to fruit trees and stuff like that. In my past, I was director of fruit farm operations for E.D. Smith, the largest fruit operation in Canada, and I know all about sweet cherry trees, strawberries, nectarines, and peaches. You cannot grow that in West Lincoln, nor can you grow apples or vineyards because of the cold. If they do grow soybeans on 10 acres, they would probably get an average between 30 and 40 bushel an acre. And at $10 to $15 a bushel, they would be well short of the minimum requirements on the Ontario Ministry of Agriculture and Food recognition and the federal government of a full-fledged farming operation, which is a gross of $7,000. So the only choice that these people had, if they wanted to get the tax break, which is 75% on the agricultural section of their land, was to rent it out to somebody. They had no choice. You cannot make that kind of money on that piece of land growing crops.
Thank you.
So that's all I can say with regards to that.
I get your point. I think we all do.
Thank you.
Thank you. Oh, Councillor Bell. You might as well.
Enough. I guess I need to say that I've seen that property for sale for quite some time. I've seen when it was sold.
Excuse me.
I seen when a culvert was going in with an extension, looked like a driveway. I wondered what was going on. Then I seen this building going up. And the building went up illegally. There was no knowledge of it. They threw it up. The building went up on the pretense that it was going to be storage for boats, snowmobiles, the residents' toys, as it's put. Obviously, that wasn't the intent. So the building was built under false pretenses as far as I could see. And then from there, the business started to be operated, and it's been running ever since. Once they were visited by the township, now this process has started where they not only want to have that little piece of land, but they want to convert the whole farm into growing trees. I'm not sure why they haven't planted any trees at this point in time. I don't see where our bylaws and municipalities stop him from doing anything else, so I can't see where it would stop him from planting trees. I listened to the IBI try to justify why this business should be there. She talked about how Hamilton has 60 farms that were grandfathered. And yeah, I read your report, and yes, they were. But those were legal farms, legal businesses. We're talking about how can you grandfather something that really don't exist. So I think that argument goes out the window. You can shake your head, but it don't exist. And there's just a lot of things in here that I can't support. Mr. Davis, he has a lot of things in his report that he put in here, just makes total sense. It really does. And, you know, in spite of my fellow councilors supporting this, I cannot support it, just based on what's going on with it. So that's all I want to say for now.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. There's a couple of questions I have that haven't actually been asked by my colleagues. So some of them probably better answered, and if you'll indulge me, better by our own staff and others by the representative from IBI. So Mr. Treble, this landscaping business is operating from a building that was built for another purpose, for an agricultural purpose. Is it it's not in close proximity to the house, as we would normally expect an ancillary business, is that correct? Have I got that map correctly?
That is correct, Madam Chair. It has its own entrance, and it's considerably to the west of the existing house.
So then the landscaping business is only, they're asking only for a business ancillary to the farm and a rezoning for a part of the property that is not anywhere near the rest of the operation.
Through you, Madam Chair, the zoning would allow for the planting of trees now. That particular piece of the zoning has always been in place. What has triggered this, in my mind, is the absence of that tree-related use now, but the business already in place. And the proposal then is to legitimize the business by putting the tree planting piece on the property proposed, by the sounds of it, once the rental agreement with the area farmer ceases.
I see. I understand all of the concerns my colleagues have about needing the value-added property types of intensification, the chicken, turkeys, barns, in value-added crops in order to make a living on 10 acres. But at the moment, this property is zoned agriculture, but it's not farming. Am I correct? It's a rental property in principle for the 4-point-odd hectares and not an agricultural farm. It is, as you said, it's the farmer is renting it and doing something with it, but the property owners are in a rental position, like I would be if I bought a house and rented it to someone else.
The property owners reside in the residence there. They don't rent it out. They simply rent the 4 hectares of farmland out.
So the majority of the property is a rental property at this point.
That would be my understanding, but the biggest portion of the income would be presumably the business in question.
At this moment, the biggest percent of the income coming off that agricultural property is for a non-agricultural use. Would that be fair to say?
That would be my guess. I don't know any of the business bottom line information.
It would be nice to understand, at least in innuendo, if that were somewhere the case. Maybe better to Ms. Gomes, but I think there was a reference in her presentation that suggested that the province supported this. That would be, the province doesn't support individual processes or individual applications. The province, through PPS and/or Places to Grow or the Greenbelt, supports the types of businesses that go on in a property. I just don't want the public at large being misled. Am I correct? The province wouldn't endorse any one business on any one property.
That would be correct to the best of my knowledge. They've
Yes.
provided a policy framework. That's
Right,
correct.
because
Yeah.
I noticed that one of the slides suggested that it was the province endorsing it. Okay. And maybe I misunderstood it, so I apologize if I did. Okay. If the building is that far away, and it is there. Is there a process in place that could end up with that building being severed?
Through you, Madam Chair, the policies allow for the severance of what's considered an agricultural business. Something like the John Deere dealership on Highway 20 is an obvious example of the kind of business that would qualify for severance. I haven't put my head around whether this particular property would qualify for a severance of the business, but that potentially is a prospect down the road. Possibly, I can't say with
Problematic,
certainty.
which then is in the division of agricultural lands that will no longer be there. I guess my last question directly to you, Mr. Treble, and I won't promise that, is at the moment, there are 6 or so employees there. If the property were to be rezoned and the nursery/landscaping business were allowed to continue, what is the limitation on ancillary to agriculture for people, staff on the property? Because I know that we have another application on the agenda tonight where someone was removed from, or had to move from agriculture.
Through you, Madam Chair, historically, municipalities had policies that tried to regulate the number of employees in businesses. But of late, the province has provided guidelines that stray away from that approach and recommend that the scale of any sort of an on-farm diversified piece should not exceed 2% of the land base of the property. And then there's some further detail inside there. So Ms. Gomes was referring to some percentages because of that provincial guideline that talks about 2%. And she was breaking it down to suggest that 1.5% of this property would be for the the on-farm diversified component of the business. And the remainder, I think it was 90-some percent, was going to be agricultural based on the proposal. So the proposal is to try and limit scale based on area, not number of employees.
Okay. So in her presentation, Ms. Gomes, and I'm directing this at you because I'm not sure. Councillor Rayner is much better at this, 2.2 something. But 0.35, thank you, 0.35 hectares of the property are going to be residential, 0.35 hectares, which would be, if I take that 2 point something, would give me less than an acre. Is that right?
0.4 would be an acre.
Yeah. So how would that less than an acre support a septic system? Because I'm having trouble, because later on in this agenda, we're talking about how septic systems need to have an acre, acre and a half. So if only 0.35 hectares is there for residential and they have a septic system, how do we allow that?
Madam Chair, I have to compliment you on dealing with all the reports in one presentation.
Thank you. I went through my agenda this time. Not that I don't always, but I'm struggling because elsewhere on the agenda, we have all these other things coming up and it's all here right in front of me.
The answer, I guess, Madam Chair, is the fact that they've identified an area for the use, but the whole of the property is what comes into play when you look at septic systems
Yes, I
and
know.
those types of uses, right?
But I do think that since we're now identifying residential, commercial, non-commercial, ancillary, I really do want to get a grasp on this. So I think my next couple of questions are, if you wouldn't mind, and you'll indulge me further, committee, that Ms. Gomes might be better suited to answer those, if you wouldn't mind. So, Ms. Gomes, I'm sure that before the technical report turns into a recommendation report, you'll get some of the questions answered. More specifically, you indicated that they would be buying their hardwood trees, and they would be buying those from the province.
Forest Ontario, that's who
Forest-
they've
right.
contacted to.
Right.
Yeah.
I've bought trees from Forest Ontario, and I've planted them myself on our farm, and this is the time to do that ordering. And it's really tough to get those trees in the amounts that you want. So have they placed their order, given that they're anxious to do this?
I don't know if they've placed the order. I do know that they've contacted them. They've gotten all the information. They've possibly placed that order, knowing when they want to put them in the ground. I can
It would
get
be
that
certainly
information.
interesting to see if the order is placed and or accepted, because I know that if you don't get it in November, you don't get trees. So if you're really anxious about getting a nursery of hardwood trees and you're buying it through the province, I'd like to see evidence of that application. And order. Okay, so I think my colleagues have gone on a number of these things, but I truly do want you to address the idea of rework your numbers. I think a house in a residential with the footprint, you need to get fair with those numbers. I think there might be a little bit of a exaggeration in some of the way you calculated it for me to pick up on a septic tank. Just be real with what you're bringing forward, if there's answers to our questions as we proceed to the next report.
So through you again, just to answer your question, so as Mr. Trouble indicated, the zoning is across the entire
understand.
property, and those areas are just trying to indicate what's going to go on each parts of those properties, so that it doesn't mean that the residential area needs a full acre. We can do that. That's not a problem. If that makes you more comfortable, we can change that and make that into a full acre for the house. That's not a problem at all.
It's just a little deceptive in the presentation as you put it forward. It's not going to change anything substantially, but it does say things to other people who are being chastised for not having minimum lot sizes, et cetera. So, if it was that close to a break, I would wonder why, if we should or if we shouldn't consider this. And in this case, I think the numbers just mislead members of the public.
That's fair. We didn't do that because, again, the property is still the property. So the property is still 6.2 hectares. So we're not changing the property. It's still one property. It's just, we were just showing from that slide what was going to happen on each part of the property. But we don't have an issue with that. We can change that and make it a full acre. That's not an issue at all.
Let's make sure that the numbers are correct if there's anything further coming forward.
Not an
The
issue.
other question I have for you is this property, the bulk of the property, over 4 hectares, is being rented now?
Correct.
Okay, so there's no agricultural income on this property at this point in time?
No.
The principal income on this property is ancillary to agriculture in the form of a landscaping business with employees coming there.
As far as I understand it.
How many employees are there right now?
6 to 8.
6 to 8. Okay. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Great. I apologize for the firing off of those questions, but I realize we've belabored this application. But I think if we get it out now, it makes it easier in the long run. So thank you, members of committee. Okay. Please be advised, I'm going back to the quasi-judicial type of wording that they make me say here. Please be advised that this is a technical report we're dealing with tonight. It is being considered by Planning Committee this evening. There is an item on the agenda subsequent to these public hearings, and a recommendation report will be forthcoming to a future Planning Committee and/or Council meeting. Please be advised that once the Planning Committee and/or Council have made their decision with respect to the zoning bylaw amendment, a notice of its passing will be circulated with an appeal period. Anyone wishing to be informed of additional meetings and/or information regarding this application should sign the sheets close to the doors, as I indicated earlier. Tonight, we remind you that if you are interested in observing council and/or committee meetings about a particular bylaw, you should not solely rely on mailed notices and thus miss the opportunity to attend meetings. It is suggested that you watch the township's website for posting of agendas to review items that will be discussed at a committee or council. The agendas for meetings are posted on the township website at 4 p.m. on the Friday prior to the meeting. Additionally, meetings scheduled are also noted on the website for the public to view. If you wish to receive notices by email, it is suggested that you include your email address with your mailing address and your phone number on the sign-up sheet identified at the exit doors. Thank you very much, and that concludes this public meeting at 7:27. Okay. Our second public meeting this evening is with regard to a draft plan of condominium and zoning bylaw amendment application submitted by 2424568 Ontario for a condominium on property known municipally as 167 St. Catherine Street. The Planning Act requires in Section 51 sub 20 that before approval of a draft plan of condominium and in Section 34, Sub 12, that before passing a zoning bylaw amendment, council must hold at least one public meeting for the purpose of informing the public in respect to the proposed draft plan of condominium and zoning bylaw amendment. The purpose of this public meeting is to receive comments and answer questions from the public regarding the draft plan of condominium application and/or zoning bylaw amendment. At this point in time, no decision has been made on either the draft plan of condominium or the zoning bylaw, and any comments received tonight will be taken into account by this committee and/or council as they consider the item. The Planning Act also requires in Section 51, Sub 53, and Section 34, Sub 13, that committee and council advise the public that if a person or public body does not make an oral submission at a public meeting or make written submission to the Township of West Lincoln before the bylaw is passed, a person or public body is not entitled to appeal the decision of council for the Township of West Lincoln to the Ontario Municipal Board. Madam Clerk, could you please advise members here and in the public at large of the method and dates by which public notice was given?
Proper notice was given by way of individual notice dated September 28, 2017.
Thank you very much. Mr. Treble, is this one with you again for explaining the purpose and reason for this draft plan of condominium and zoning bylaw amendment?
I've asked Mr. Bourma to take this file on.
Mr. Bourma, no S.
Yes. Thank you, Madam Chair. An application for rezoning has been made, and draft condominium has been made by Kevin Gonson for the property known as 167 St. Catherine Street in Smithville on the north side of the road, east of College Street and west of Dufferin. These applications have been made to allow for a 20 townhouse unit condominium. The existing zoning on the regular shaped property is residential multiple RM2 on the front portion of the property, residential low density in the middle of the property, and environmental conservation in the rear of the property where there are some existing trees. The proposed zoning submitted by the applicant is to a residential multiple RM2 zone with several site-specific exceptions. The zoning would allow for the townhouse dwellings. The added exceptions are required due to the irregular lot shape and the density of units the applicant is trying to achieve on that site. We did the calculation, it's approximately 90 people per hectare. Some of the special exceptions that the applicant is requesting include reductions to the required lot area, the required lot frontages, front and side and rear yards, lot coverage, and some stuff to do with the driveway width and the setbacks to the driveway. Maybe Joanne can put it up on the screen for a second. So that's the application. On infill development such as this application, planning policy requires that there be a balance between achieving higher densities and maintaining the existing character of the community. The official plan designation for these lands is residential medium density, which allows for a density of 20 to 40 dwelling units per hectare. And this application comes in at around 35 units per hectare, so it would generally comply with that official plan designation. Under the Places to Grow plan, the province requires that 60% of all development exists within the existing urban boundaries. So this proposal would help achieve that goal, as well as other proposals along this street. Planning staff have received comments from several agencies and also received one public comment from a neighbor. And that public comment just is in regards to some discussion that was held about purchasing adjacent lands, which are located right up here on the screen where the mouse is. I don't know if you can see that. However, that deal I don't think has happened or nothing materialized. Maybe the applicant can speak more to that when he comes up and speaks if he so chooses. One of the outstanding comments we have not yet received are from the Conservation Authority. They must review the environmental impact study that was completed which is required in our official plan for changing a zoning from an environmental conservation zoning to a residential zoning or any other zoning. And that's for the townhouse units at the very north end. So once MPCA provides comments, and we've received all other comments from the public and any other agencies, planning staff recommend that a recommendation report be prepared and brought again to this committee. And the applicant is here, and I believe that he wishes to speak or address you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Borma. Okay, is the applicant or the authorized agent of the applicant present to speak to this? Very good. Please come forward. Give us your name, and the microphone is yours. Again, I'm going to remind members of the committee that there is a technical report on the agenda for this later on, once the public meetings are done.
Okay, through you, Madam Chair. My name is Kevin Gonson. I am the applicant, owner of the property. I would like to thank staff for their technical report. It's well written. We're in agreement with their analysis of the planning documents that are relevant to this parcel. We're seeking approval for 20 units, as was stated, on a private condominium road. The units will be freehold. What we do require is some minor revisions to the zoning bylaw, which I believe was just passed in June or July of this year. As you can sort of see from the plan up there, the property is somewhat irregular shape, so as you get towards the northern boundary, it does pinch in a bit. And in particular, our units 4, 5, and 6 are where a majority of all the exceptions are due to that pinch point. We sort of feel that the reductions are in keeping with what is around in the neighborhood. There's other setbacks to the west that are all the way down to 5 meters. Our one unit, as you can see there, the backyard is very triangular. I believe it's about 4.5, I'm rounding, but we've provided a extra side yard so that the unit is livable and has, the amenity areas that would be required or expected. We've also provided on the plan a buffer block at the very north. Previous to the new zoning coming in place, there was no environmental constraints on the site. We did prepare what's called an EIS, Environmental Impact Statement. About a year ago, we had circulated it previously to Conservation Authority and received comments and addressed those comments. We were hoping that we would have comments by the time the technical report was prepared, but we don't. The buffer is to compensate for that, so there'd be some planting going on in there. I believe, in general, it's our opinion and our feeling that this is good planning, that this will be very good for the town. I believe we've had positive feedback from the area. I'm here to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you. And members of the committee will likely want to wait until after the public's spoken, but so
That's fine.
we'll probably call you back up. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, are there any submissions from the public here this evening wishing to speak to this item? I'm going to ask once more if there are any oral written submissions from any members of the public here present that would like to be presented at this time. Okay, come forward, state your name and...
My name is Monique Ralphs. I live at 163 St. Catherine Street, the neighbor to this vacant property. I was actually just wondering, I know that there's an easement that runs through my property, and part of my concern would be, is my backyard going to get torn up through this whole new development that's happening? And then just the traffic that's going to be running in beside my house all the time.
Thank you. Mr. Truckle, did you want to address that now? 163 is to the west. isn't it?
Through you, yes, I think 163 is the house immediately west of the proposed entrance. The easement through the rear yards, Mr. Boerma and I have been discussing that, and it's an existing sewer easement that provides sewer connection, I believe, to all of the houses along there. And I understand as part of this development, the sewer easement will get relocated since proposed housing units in this condominium, 17, 18, 19, and 20, will be on top of the easement in its current location. So I understand there's a proposal to relocate the easement into Street B, I believe, was the thinking. I'm not aware that that would involve or result in any removal or opening up of the neighbors' lands, but if there were, that would obviously need to be done with permission of the individual here tonight. So at this point, I can't say with any certainty. As we go forward and put together conditions of draft plan approval, should there be a positive report, that's when we'll start getting into engineering design and all of that detail that'll confirm exactly what the nature of the clearance is. On the other point, with respect to the proximity of an entranceway to the residential unit, there is the possibility that something like a solid board-on-board fence or a hedgerow, those kind of things could be required to make sure that lights are not directed into any of the windows in the dwelling.
I do have a fence. I did build a fence already, just
Okay.
because right now the property is an eyesore most of the time. They ripped it all up and haven't been looking after the property. I've had to call on a couple occasions to get proper grass cutting done and things like that.
Property standards.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then just, I guess, if it does go through, that I have access maybe to the road from the back of my back gate, you know, something that maybe me and the owner could talk about.
I think your concerns would be best taken up with the owner between now and then to determine how your concerns could be addressed that way. But because if they're personal in nature, but if it's general with regard to the intensity or something, that's acceptable here.
That's it.
Okay.
Thank you.
Any other members of the public wishing to address committee? Seeing none. Okay, I will reiterate that this may be the only public meeting with respect to these applications. Therefore, if any member of the public have comments, they should state them now, as the OMB may not consider comments made during any other council or committee meeting. Also, anyone wishing to speak are required to come forward to the microphone. Seeing none, I'm going to ask if any members of committee have questions. Councillor Rayner, I've seen your hand first.
Thank you. Madam Chair, through you to Mr. Trumbull, has there been bylaw enforcement on this property?
Through you, Madam Chair, we have had requests for grass maintenance from time to time, yes.
Madam Chair, I just have difficulty with that. It's just that if you own property, it's your responsibility to look after it. So now we're going into a condominium complex with the same mentality we had to look after a vacant piece of property. I can only feel bad about the neighbor, because if they don't care about cutting the grass and making it look nice, they're certainly not going to care how the property looks like during construction. So I would feel very sympathetic to this neighbor, although I don't know what to do about it, but care and proper maintenance of property you own is the privilege of owning property, and this doesn't give me a good feeling.
I agree, Councillor.
If
The only thing,
excuse me, if there wasn't the bylaw enforcement to say, you know, actually, this actually happened, it got to the point where they had to go in and do it, that's pretty sad that the owner can't even look after a vacant piece of property. I mean, then why do you even have it if you don't want to care for it? Like, I have difficulty with people who just let things go and say the heck with it. The attitude is not in favor of coming to council and asking for something when you've shown no deserve or earning of consideration on something as simple as cutting your grass. But that's my point. Thank you.
so the only issue here would be, as they enter into a draft plan, securities will be taken and posted with the town. So The good thing about that would be that anything that was happening during development after the draft plan agreement is signed, the town has access to funds posted by the developer and can maintain the integrity of the site and prevent the neighbors from being impacted. Am I right, Mr. Treble?
Certainly, that's the purpose of having securities during construction. That's correct, Madam Chair. In addition, there would be a condo board responsible for maintenance of the facility on a long-term going forward basis. So that's probably even better news in terms of maintenance. The one thing I guess I would just like to have on the record, Madam Chair, just for what it's worth, I think it does give a little bit of an understanding of some of the difficulties with maintenance right now. One of the requirements that was identified as part of the early on planning work was the need for an archaeological assessment. That archaeological assessment resulted in the lands being plowed. Hence, they're not necessarily very smooth for maintenance purposes. But maintenance has been done by the owner at our request. We have not stepped in to do any maintenance to date that I'm aware of.
Thank you, Mr. Treble. Councillor Rayner, anything additional?
I appreciate you mentioning all the safety net that we would put over this to ensure that it's done. But I'm sorry, I come from the old school, and I shouldn't have to be babysat because I can't trust you. And that's really the impression I get by this. We're getting this money up front because we don't have a good reputation. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Rayner. Councillor Bell?
Overall, I don't have objections. I'm happy to see something being done with that property, but I do have some concerns. You're talking 90 people per hectare, when 80 is like the maximum, and at this point in time, we haven't built a development that's achieved that 80 per hectare. So to my point, I don't know if the owner has revisited or had more talks with the individual from 131 that has the irregular lot that comes into where this condo is going. I'd like to see him possibly talk again to open up the lines of communication, because if he could, as was indicated by the owner, he's willing to sell all or part of that parcel. If he could purchase the part to open up the bulb at the end, that would alleviate some of my concerns as to why there's so many site-specific exceptions on this property. I'm not really happy to see them all. There's quite a few on here. So by moving that bulb west would eliminate, I would believe, quite a few of the site-specific exceptions. So my request is that the owner of this property make contact with the owner of 131 and revisit that before you come back, and hopefully we can eliminate some of these site-specific exceptions. That's all I got to say.
Okay.
Thank you.
Councillor Bilsma?
Well, Councillor Bell has stolen a little bit of my thunder because I was kind of going down the same path. The densities on this were 90. I know the province likes to see 85, so it's a little bit more than they're asking. My experience is often developments like this put forward something, maybe it's a bit of a bartering kind of where they aim for something and see what comes back. And if I think it's legitimate, or my question is, if we reduce this parcel by one or two lot numbers, down to say 18, would we be able to eliminate the vast majority of these minor variations that are being proposed? A lot of time these things come to because we're shoehorning. Maybe that's not a technical term, but we're putting butter on the corner of these things to squeeze these developments in, and we're trying to get the max. And I understand, the implications and some of the reasons why. And so I'm wondering if we could get the number down, would it be conceivable that if we drop the number of units down by 1 or 2 units, that the vast majority of these exceptions might be just go away, and it would just by through design process and they're asking, like I said, I think it's a legitimate ask, simply because they're already exceeding the province, and they're certainly exceeding anything, as Councillor Bell had said, anything that we've seen in our municipality before. So in terms of the neighborhood, they're certainly not, spacing it out. I've stated for the record many times my personal feeling about these type of units, and I reserve that at this time, just thinking that just echoing what Councillor Bell said, and the question is it conceivable that if we reduce the number of units by one or two, that the vast majority of these exceptions could go away? And I'd probably direct that
To Mr. Treble.
Mr. Treble, or to the
So, Mr. Treble?
agent.
Through you, Madam Chair, I can start, and Mr. Boerma might have some additional thoughts. We heard Mr. Gonson refer to the pinch point in around units 4, 5, and 6. And a lot of the pinch point is because the houses are heading closer to the back lot line this way, as Garrett is pointing out there, up in that area. So reducing the number of units doesn't necessarily solve the problem, would be my first thought. It might be that you'd have to reduce the actual size of the individual living space per unit or something like that to reduce some of the pinch point. But we haven't done any further analysis to know exactly whether there's a way to eliminate some of those. I don't know, Garrett, have you seen anything further, or?
Through you, Madam Chair, I think the site plan is just in draft stage at the moment, so I think none of these numbers are set in stone, but most of the issues I've seen are up in this corner as well, where the property narrows out. And I think the applicants are trying to put a road through end houses, which adds to just a large width of space that they need, and that's why they're asking for some of these reductions. I don't know, maybe Kevin can explain if he's ran through some other numbers. This is the
Johnson,
only
did you
concept
wanna
I've
come
seen.
forward, or are you comfortable with what staff were saying about this application at this time?
Through you, Madam Chair. This is about the third or fourth concept that we've come up with. We had as many as 24 units on here, so it's not our first, kick at the can or our best or whatever the comments were. We just got the comments on Friday, so we really haven't had a chance to come up with any alternatives. One of the biggest concerns is the size of the traffic turnaround area that's required. It creates a number of issues. Our original plan didn't have as many of these requests, but the region's insistence on a much larger traffic turnaround area has created a bunch of the zoning requests. And as I had previously stated, it is, for the most part, it is units 4 and 5. 6, I think, is deficient by very little. We're talking millimeters, not, miles.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if that helps, but I thought I should say something.
Thank you. Councillor Bilsman,
Yeah, I'm a little, the box, the shaded areas, those are the driveways.
Correct?
And then the houses or the units themselves are that square, yeah, there we go, okay, so I'm understanding this correctly. So let's say we take, for example, 4, 5, and 6, we take those and we reshape them in such a way that we lose one unit and we stub up. I know they have this nice, I'm going to guess probably 45 or 50 foot length to them, but if we thickened them up and made them stockier buildings, then yeah, you would lose one, and we're acknowledging that that's kind of maybe what's happened, but it would give you the clearances in the backyard, that you wouldn't have to go the 45 feet deep, but you could go, say, a 40-foot house, but it would be 3 feet wider or something like that. That's the kind of thing that I think would certainly satisfy me. I don't know, speaking for myself, that's the kind of, the give and take that I think we need to eliminate a lot of these pinch points. or at least to this one?
Through you, Madam Chair, that anything's possible.
Yeah.
Like I said, it's a draft, right?
Yep.
I believe Garrett said it was a draft, and
Yep.
we just got the comments, so
Yep.
we can look at a bunch of different things.
Thank you. No
Thank
further.
you. Well, before you go away, if there's no one else, I have 2 questions. Oh, there it is. The Street B,
Yes.
seems to be a bullnose that ends nowhere or serves no purpose of any great consequence. Is that intended for future development connections going to the east?
Through you, Madam Chair, and Madam Chair, Street B is actually driveway access for 17, 18, 19, and 20.
Okay.
It would have, be like a rear lane, so that the front of the unit will actually face St. Catherine Street.
That was my second question, because
Okay.
I sure don't want
Just getting
backyards or gates or fences facing onto St. Catharines. It would make for an unsightly kind of thing into the future, so.
Through you, Madam Chair, staff did indicate that they did not want any road sewers, as I believe it's called.
I think so.
So the access would be off of Street B. There's a possibility, I believe my neighbor there bought the parcel a little while ago, like she hasn't owned it very long. Had I seen it before her, I might have bought it for that exact reason.
Okay.
I will have a discussion with her.
I understand completely. So you will be talking to your neighbor at 163 about the idea of any kind of impacts your construction or development will have on
Absolutely,
her
yeah.
property?
Yes.
And any kind of control mechanisms that are required. So that's on the record.
Mm-hmm.
We have that from you and her concerns as well. Okay, that was basically, oh, my other question, I guess, thank you, will probably be through to Mr. Borma or to Mr. Treble, and that is, there is not enough land here for a parkland dedication, so in fact, this will be a payment in lieu of parkland?
Through you, Madam Chair, that's what I would expect would happen at the time of conditions of draft plan of condo
Right.
approval.
Okay. So just making sure that we're all of the understanding, there's no intention of putting parkland, fitting it in anywhere. It was always your intention to a payment in lieu. Okay, and an 85, 90 person density. Okay, thank you. Seeing no other questions, comments, or concerns from members of the committee, I return to my required text, which is to say that please be advised that this is a technical report being considered by Planning Committee this evening, and that a recommendation report will be forthcoming to a future Planning Committee and Council. Please be advised that once the Planning Committee and/or Council have made a decision with respect to the zoning bylaw amendment and draft plan of condominium, pardon me, a notice of their passing will be circulated with an appeal period. There is an attendance sign-in sheet located near the exit doors. If you wish to be notified, please sign indicating which application you are looking to want information on by a tick mark in the appropriate column. This file is 2424568 Ontario, Plan of Condo. People who are interested in observing council and/or committee discussions about a particular bylaw should not solely rely on mailed notices and thus miss the opportunity to attend meetings. It is suggested that you watch the township's website for postings of agendas to review items that will be discussed at a committee or council meeting. The agendas for meetings are posted on the township website at 4 p.m. on a Friday prior to the meeting. Additionally, meeting schedules are also noted on the town website for the public to view. If you wish to receive notices by mail, it is suggested that you include your email address with your mailing address and your phone number on the attendance sign-in sheet. I declare this public hearing concluded at 7:56. Okay, so. I apologize, I'm just getting back into my agenda. Okay, the public meeting number 3 is with regard to a zoning bylaw amendment application by Shen Jor Gao. I'm sorry about names. I'll do my best. The Planning Act requires that under Section 34, Sub 12, that before passing a zoning bylaw amendment, council must hold at least one public meeting for the purpose of informing the public of its, in respect to its amendment. The purpose of tonight's meeting is to receive comments and answer questions from the public regarding the amendment to the Township of West Lincoln zoning bylaw. We stress that at this point, no decision has been made on the proposed amendment, and any comments received will be taken into account by committee in their consideration. The Planning Act also requires, through Section 34, Sub 13, that committee advise the public that if a person or public body does not make oral submissions at a public meeting or make written submissions to the Township of West Lincoln before the bylaw is passed, the person and/or public body is not entitled to appeal the decision of committee or council for the Township of West Lincoln to the Ontario Municipal Board. Madam Clerk, could you please advise the method and dates on which public notice was given?
Proper notice was given by way of individual notice dated October 12, 2017.
Thank you. Okay, Mr. Treble, is this with you or Mr. Borma tonight?
This one is with me, Madam Chair.
Please provide us with understanding of the information regarding the zoning bylaw amendment for Mr. Shin Jor Gao.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair. Happy to start providing some additional understanding to committee and the public. We do have better representation from the applicants here tonight, which will assist us, I think, as well, and not just us, but the public as well. So this is a follow-up to a public meeting that was first held on July the 24th. The property is situated at 1374 Port Davidson Road and is legally described as part of lots 4 and 5, concession 3 in the former township of Gainsborough. The land is 20.9 hectares in size, situated on the west side of Port Davidson Road, south of Silver Street and north of Vaughan. The property is proposed to be used for the growing of medical marijuana. Since the first public meeting, planning staff have been informed with respect to the nature of the licenses, and this is not a licensed facility per se in accordance with Health Canada's requirements. This is an operation that is considered more of a personal nature, but with 4 different licenses tied to this property. Health Canada has issued licenses to 4 individuals, and those 4 individuals have approached the owners of this property to grow the marijuana on their behalf on this property, and that is permitted by Health Canada's regulations. Each of the Health Canada certificates, however, do say on them that they are required to operate in accordance with all other relevant federal, provincial, and municipal laws, and that would include zoning, which was the discussion at the first public meeting and continues to be the issue before us here tonight. So, Madam Chair, the way the township has structured provisions in our zoning bylaw, it says in the general provisions section of the zoning bylaw that a property in an agricultural area can be considered a location for a medical marijuana facility, subject to establishing or complying with certain criteria. Those would include setbacks from all adjacent property boundaries, 150-meter setback, as well as approval of a zoning amendment through the Township Council. Alternately, there are also provisions that allow for such a facility to establish within the industrial park or industrial parklands of the township. This particular application is proposed at this property and is proposing to grow somewhere close to 1,000 marijuana plants in order to comply with all of the licenses that have been issued. There is a planning justification report that was provided and is an attachment to the staff report. The consultant that authored that planning justification report is here tonight, Madam Chair, and I believe intends to speak to his report. The owners are both in attendance, And I believe the same individual that was here before, who was involved with the greenhouse structures, is also in attendance. Madam Chair, the other thing I've been asked to do by Lisa Jansen, who will speak later, is advise that she had received some written correspondence at the time of the first public meeting back in July, but that documentation was not provided to the township. I have it before me in my hands right now. I don't know that there's much in here that we didn't already hear. In fact, some of the names in here I recognize from speaking the last time as well, but I'll maybe just list the names of the people that have provided communication to Lisa Jansen, expressing some concerns with the proposal. Alice Youngsma, Kathy Hillgartner, Lim Burners, I don't have first names, Ken Martin at 6800 Elko Road, I believe he spoke last time, Ian and Sue Mead, I think this is Natazi Blocker, and Andy and Debbie Blocker, Fred and Rose Merritt, James and Larissa Smith, and Aaron and Irene Loudon have all provided some written documentation that was provided to the township tonight. Joanne will attach those to the minutes of the meeting so that they are available for the public as part of the record. And in addition, there was a petition submitted by Lisa Jansen tonight. I'm not sure how many names are on it, but it says, "We, the undersigned residents and or property owners of the Township of West Lincoln, located within a 10-kilometer distance from the proposed medical marijuana grow facility located on the property at 1374 Port Davidson Road, hereby request that Town Council deny the application of Mr. Shejor Gao to have the property at 1374 Port Davidson Road rezoned to allow a medical marijuana grow facility. We feel that such a business carries with it too many inherent risks for public safety, community degradation, environmental and health risks. This particular business impacts the entire community in a negative way and cannot in any way enhance or benefit this community." And as I say, Madam Chair, signed by a number of different residents, by the sounds of it, within this 10-kilometer radius. So perhaps, Madam Chair, with that, I'll suggest that we turn it over to the agent for the applicant to speak to his planning report at this time.
Thank you, Mr. Treble. I doubt that that's the last time you'll be speaking about this issue with us this evening. So without further ado, Mr. Sullivan, I believe you're the acting agent on behalf of the owners?
Yes, I am, Madam Chair. Thank you. My name is Michael Sullivan. I'm a registered professional planner representing Mr. Gao, who's in the front row over there, and his son Wei. They are the applicants and the owners of the property. I won't get into the planning specifics of the application. My report should speak for itself. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have. I thought I would focus on the comments from the public and provide council with the committee with additional information, if that's acceptable.
Mr. Sullivan, this is your time to tell us, and if you want to bring out highlights from your report, I would suggest that you don't rely on us as understanding your report, but it's your show, so go for it.
Thank you, Madam Chair. What I will say from the report is that the application is for an agricultural use. The property is designated agricultural. The property is zoned agricultural. As Mr. Treble noted before, the property, the medical marijuana use is permitted subject to meeting certain criteria. And those criteria were identified as 150-meter separation distance or setback from neighboring residential uses, a 1.8-meter fence to be located around the perimeter of the operation, the proposed operation, and a zoning bylaw amendment, which is of course subject to our public meeting tonight. I also understand there was a public meeting held in July on this, which raised several questions, and I'll say insufficient information was provided at that point. I also noted that Mr. Uerslut, the greenhouse, who's going to be constructing the greenhouse, was unable to attend tonight due to an emergency. He is not here, but I can certainly get any questions to him. I want to note one correction on the planning report, and it was I take responsibility for this. It was point number 3, that and the existing outbuildings, the existing outbuildings would be used for an expansion to the medical marijuana facility, and they do not meet the 150-meter required setback. That was a misunderstanding I had with my client. There is 2 properties, as I'll show you on the presentation in a moment. All buildings will comply with the 150-meter setback. I understood there was the existing barn which would be used for off-season use. That was not correct. How do I put that up?
Joanne.
Oh, Joanne.
There we go. So that's the property. You can see that. Location 1374 Port Davidson Road. Bit of a zoom in. I did a drive around the property to see the different types of uses that are in the area. The blue R is for residential, the yellow B is for business, and the white A is for agriculture. This is the proposed development. For council's benefit, those are 15 greenhouses proposed in that location, in those locations. They are all in excess of 150 meters from the property line. That's what's being proposed currently. I provided this with Mr. Ursluit's assistance, and what this demonstrates is that all buildings, this is a proposed maximized concept, and it shows, you can see there's 15 greenhouses there, and the building, the warehouse to the east side of that is the barn that was in question. That was what had been identified by my client as being used for possibly off-season growth of the medical marijuana, rather than my understanding, which was the barn at the front of the property next to the house. So this is the maximized build-out. If I take committee over to the screen here again and show the blue dashed line around the greenhouses, that is proposed to be a fence. My client has agreed to go 2.4 meters, I believe, for a fence rather than the minimum 1.8 meters. He wishes to go higher with the fence than is required. So as you can see, that is as proposed. There's nothing proposed outside of the use at this point. So it does fully comply with the township's criteria. This screen shows a typical cross-section or typical side profile of the greenhouse, of a greenhouse that would be used. These are, and I'll actually take you to the next one if I may. There's the typical exterior. You can see the interior on the left and the exterior on the right. They are not insulated. They are a hard shell, a hard frame, but they are a material shell to them. And so cannot be used outside of the regular growing season. They are not heated. Water is provided, electricity is provided, but as you can see with the marijuana plants shown there, they are each individually planted within soil in the greenhouse. And they would be using a similar method, I understand, within the proposal. Mr. Urslut drove around and found a couple of comparable medical marijuana facilities, one in Beamsville, one in Jordan. Photographs of those are up on the screen, just for the public's information. Next one here is Health Canada licensing. There's been much discussion around the type of licensing that applies here, and Mr. Treble correctly identified the type of licensing being used here. So I'll go down to it and say the licensed producer, Tweed Inc., Tweed Farms out of Niagara-on-the-Lake. I'm sure there's a couple of operations as well in Lincoln. They are licensed producers. They have specific licensing from Health Canada that include high security, hydroponics. They use hydroponics for year-round growth, and they're larger scale. They have hundreds of clients who order products online through a website. That order goes into the operation. It's filled. A courier then takes that order and takes it away and delivers it to the individuals. So there's no public access to these operations. In the case of the individual registrant, there are four licenses granted to individuals, of which I have copies, and township staff were graceful to provide them to me. 4 individual applications, all being grown in this location under what we call an individual registrant by a designated person. So the owner of the property, Mr. Gao, will be the designated person, and those 4 individual licenses are the only businesses that are legally allowed to be fulfilled through this operation. So again, there will be no public available here, there will be no signage, etc. This is small scale. At the moment, Health Canada's regulations permit a maximum of 4 licenses, so there can be no expansion. Daily quantity according to the licensing restrictions, we have 50 grams of dried marijuana. And my understanding is it takes approximately 5 to 6 marijuana plants to grow to produce 1 gram of dried marijuana. In addition, we have a possession limit of 150 grams of dried marijuana. So this is all taken directly from the license. The production area is indoors only. There is no, Health Canada does not permit in this application medical marijuana to be grown outdoors. It's only indoors. And there is provision for indoor and outdoor. In this case, it's strictly indoor. Maximum storage quantity is 10,980 grams of dried marijuana. So my understanding from my client is that and I'm not an expert in medical marijuana, I'm just taking it from what I've learned through researching this project, is once the marijuana is grown to the right size, the various strains are grown to the right size, it's harvested, it's cut, it's taken into the greenhouse, it is dried, which takes approximately 2 to 3 days. It is then, the buds are removed, and those are what are used to fulfill the license at this point. The remainder is destroyed. Growing season is mid-May to mid-October. There was some discussion I had with staff about growing full season, full year long. That is not happening at this point. That was an error on my side. So disposal of waste plants, there's much discussion about what would happen with the plants if there's too many that are grown. I should note there are 966 plants total. That's with all 4 licenses combined. Those are planted. If there is excess, there's always a waste factor with the medical marijuana. If there is waste, it's bleached to ensure it's not usable, and it's composted off-site. So there's actually no production here beyond drying and packing and bundling and taking away. So in terms of greenhouses, 15 are required. I have confirmed with my client that those are required. Staff contacted me in advance and said how much space are we required per plant. In discussing with my client, it depends on the strain of medical marijuana. There are several strains available. It would depend on that. But they are planted, as you saw with the previous slide, they are planted with a tremendous amount of space. They're planted in soil. They don't use hydroponics, but so they grow naturally. Water is provided by a cistern. If you've driven by the property recently, you'll notice that there's a special hydro connection to the main line. And sewage, there is no additional sewage proposed. There's a washroom in the dwelling, and I understand there's no additional sewage systems proposed in the greenhouses. So there we go, question and answer. Based upon questions raised so far, we have 5 to 6 plants equals 1 gram of dried marijuana. We have 244 plants which are proposed, which are the limit of each license times 4 licenses equals 976 plants. That equals, they're allowed to store a total of 43,920 grams of marijuana. We have 65 plants per greenhouse. If we can do less than that, I'm sure through negotiating with the township on site plan, might be able to reduce that, but right now that is what is required based on my understanding. Will the growing occur all year round? Spring, summer only? That's it. And then I said fall, winter for limited growing, simply because if the season permits. Will the public have access? No. There will be no signage proposed. There will be no clients coming to pick up the product at the property. It will be a courier that will come in and remove or take product away and deliver it to customers. There will be no public access. The public will not know about this property. It certainly will not be advertised. Security, again, 1.8 meter chain link fence is the minimum required. My client has proposed to go higher to 2.4. The house will be occupied, and the house will be occupied throughout. Traffic, had several comments provided as a result of the July public meeting. In terms of traffic, there is no signage, there is no public access. It is a private property, a private operation. Typical agricultural traffic is expected. I would note on that the excess property, that less than 150 meters from the property line, my client has advised me that he will be seeking to rent that land, the excess land, to an area farmer for continued ongoing agricultural use. In terms of noise, an HVAC system, heating, ventilation, air conditioning system will be used. A cistern will be used for water, and everything will be in compliance with Health Canada regulations. So we anticipate regular agricultural noise levels here, nothing more, nothing less. In terms of smell, which is a concern, a charcoal filter will be attached, will be installed on the HVAC system for each of the greenhouses to ensure that no smell leaves the greenhouses. In terms of the smell, the buds being removed from the plants right in bed would be the only area where smell would emanate, and that will all occur inside. Finally, in terms of real estate, no signage is requested. No signage will be sought. Agricultural character will be maintained. It is another crop. It simply uses greenhouses to grow. There'd be no visible sign of the operation. And finally, in my recent experience of selling my own house, I was asked to note if I had ever had the house had ever been used as a grow-op. I'm not aware of any grow-ops in my area, and I'm sure, and there likely are, but I'm not aware of any because real estate transactions don't require that. And that is the end of the show. Thank you very much. I'm open to any questions you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Sullivan. As usual with presentations, we don't have that presentation in our agenda package. I would assume you're making that available to the clerk for distribution to members of committee and the public if they wish it.
Yes, Madam Chair, the copy is available.
Okay, that'll be posted with the clerk by tomorrow morning. Great, thank you. Okay. If that's the end of your presentation, Mr. Sullivan, then I would ask for public submissions, unless you wanted, neither of the owners wish to speak, there's no one else wishing to speak on behalf of the application. You're it.
I am it, Madam Chair.
You're done. Okay, thank you so much. Now I'll move on to members of the public wishing to address this application. Are there any individuals wishing to come forward? I would expect that you would take your turns coming forward rather than me pointing out who it is until we've exhausted people in the audience. State your name, please, for the record. And if you have a prepared presentation, if you could, just as I've asked Mr. Sullivan, make a copy available to the clerk either immediately completing your presentation or by tomorrow morning if you could send it in. And Ms. Shime would be happy to give you her email number, address, whatever. Anyway, so thank you. For the record, hi.
Hi. I do have it, a written copy for you.
Great.
I'll give it
And
to
you
after I'm
are?
done reading it. My name is Rudy. I live on Port Davidson Road.
Great.
I've lived in the area since 1999.
Thank you, Rudy. We just need your last name. just so-
Kerek, K-E-R-E-C.
Thank you. Thank you very
Okay.
much.
All right, I'll make it quick. I'm just going to get to the meat and potatoes of it. So it's regarding the property at 1374 Port Davidson Road, requesting for rezoning for marijuana. Access to cannabis for medical purpose regulations state that the grower must comply with all municipal bylaws, including bylaws about zoning. My question is, why has growing already started if this hasn't been approved? Also, under the same regulations, it state that growers are responsible to make sure that all marijuana plants are secure so that people, children, or anybody else cannot access them. I have pictures of the property where the building is wide open, the gate is wide open, and there's nobody around. I'm a little concerned about that. We drove by daily, the gate is open, a farm gate which is wide open, and a man door of the building where there are grow lights operating 24/7. Also in these same guidelines, limiting the smell coming from production. Again, if anybody was driven by the property during the last week of October, first week of November, they could smell it from the road, if not even further. If the applicant is not following the rules now, how can we as residents trust that he or she does not start growing and none of the rules will be followed? Also, in West Lincoln, ready for the issue to come along with the grow-ops, will you have extra policing? I have a list of recent illegal grow-ops in Beansville and other locations that have been shut down by police or targeted by thieves. If we're going to allow it to be grown in West Lincoln, at least consider only allowing it in industrial areas where you're not bringing this kind of activity into our backyards. Also, can I ask a question of the gentleman who was just up, or is that not appropriate?
We don't usually allow that,
Okay,
so
no
you
problem.
could put a question out there,
Okay, I'll
and
put a
we'll have it
question out
answered
there.
at the appropriate time.
Yeah, I had written down a question. It stated that, sorry, I'm trying to find my notes here.
I know that one of the members of council will probably want to ask that question if
Yeah.
it's not answered now.
Yeah, it said, the gentleman said, and my question is, there were some places mentioned in Beansville that are growing marijuana legally. I have articles there. If those are the two, at those two addresses, one on King Street and another address, they've been shut down due to issues. So I don't know if that was in reference to that. So they were shut down by the Niagara Regional Police. I do have that all in my submission here to you people with the pictures of the open gate and open door at this location. So, I'm sure there's a lot of other people that like to say stuff. I just want to get to that point. I don't want to take up too much of your time, so if I can give this to somebody.
Clerk, thank you very much.
No, thank you. Thank you for your time and thank you for allowing me to speak.
Anyone else wishing to speak on this matter? Please come to the microphone, state your name, pardon me. And at the end, if you could provide us with a presentation or when it will be presented will be great.
Hi, my name is Ingrid Sickens. Madam Chair, dear esteemed council members, thank you for having me here tonight. We live on 6091 Vaughan Road around the corner. I come before you to protest against the rezoning of this property. The owners of this site have not taken care of it in the past year. I've contacted Township a number of times to have the weeds cut down. Among the farmers in the area, it's known as fleabane acres. This is a new weed that is glyphosate resistant and is very hard to kill. The seed heads are very tiny and very mobile. They grow as soon as they are moist. Cold does not stop its growth. One plant can produce 250,000 seeds. We own the land across the road, 144 acres. There are regulations in the township that need to be followed if we're going to have a property like this with this kind of zoning. They're going to have to follow the rules. Number two, the owners have been growing marijuana without proper permits in this past year, and it can be smelled as we drive past. This has also not been policed. Going forward, I do not see that the following rules will be followed, as they have not been followed as at this point. Who's going to police this project to see that they're met with the industry standards? The smell this summer was quite noticeable, and we called you, Councillor Chichok, and we've spoke to you about it before. And this is happening before anything has even been built. It should be located far away from neighbors and not in a hamlet such as Vaughan. On the photos that he showed of the properties in the area, it showed one R as a resident, but there's many more houses that are close by. Also, for number 3, I'm concerned about the smell that will be hard to be controlled in the proposed hoop houses. That when we got the paperwork earlier in the year, it showed hoop houses, and we just saw some pictures of the hoop houses that were going to be proposed. They were open on the sides, on the long sides. How can they control the smell with the hoop houses open like that? And with those type of structures, if you have them closed, I've worked in them for 10 years, they are very hot, that you cannot work as a person in that type of hoop house. So I don't know how they're going to control the smell or how they're going to work with plant products in there. And then number 4, as for security, is the local police force able to promise the local community safety from threats such as such a business would bring? I do not feel that that this is a proper area for this type of business. We own 144 acres of bare land across the road that we crop. We've owned it since the 70s, and my husband's family has been here since 1960. We appreciate our neighbors, and we would appreciate that they would follow the proper farming practices in the area. And mostly we are very concerned with the smells and the proper zoning. And that's my proposal. I have it written down, and I have also from Ontario Farmer about the glyphosate-resistant weeds.
Right. Thank you, Mrs. Sickens. Anyone else wishing to come forward? Please.
My name is Lisa Jansen, and I live around the corner, and my property is directly adjacent to this property. I apologize if my speech goes a little bit long. I've come very well prepared. Dear Council and residents of West Lincoln, it is established fact that our federal government considers marijuana or cannabis a viable business venture medicinally and is currently working towards this recreationally. It is also an established fact that cannabis is not an ordinary regular horticultural or agricultural crop. The very nature of this plant structure and its potential uses are not just beneficial but also very harmful. Research conducted thus far has proven both of these facts, but it particularly has established that children under the age of 20 who is exposed to cannabis has their developing mental and or physical functions permanently altered, while for mature individuals the effects, good or bad, are shown to be temporary. For individuals suffering from various ailments that impede normal regular functioning, cannabis use has thus far been shown to be more beneficial than negative. I'm sure that many of us here have our own opinions in regards to cannabis, but I am also sure that many of us would not wish to deprive suffering individuals from having access to a quality product that enhances their ability to function. Even our federal government acknowledges that cannabis businesses creates its own unique risks to the general residents of our country and has developed guidelines currently in the form of Access to Cannabis for Medical Purposes Regulations, or CMPR. No other horticultural or agricultural crop that I know of requires such an extensive document. This document contains guidelines such as needing licenses to grow, which specifies quantity limits, types of harvesting, and production. Requirements for security, which includes a fencing system, a camera monitoring system, security checks on lead hands, and specific record-keeping practices during growing. Requirements for odor control, as the production of a quantity of plants emits a strong, distinctive odor. Regular monitoring of the growers' businesses, which includes regular inspections for compliance to all the ACMPR regulations. All licensed producers must comply with any and all municipal laws and written notice provided to all local governments, including municipalities, police, and fire departments. This document also requires patients who require cannabis to be listed on a register list and include information if they intend to grow their own product or appoint a designated grower. Their prescription needs dictate how many plants they may grow at one time. Designated growers must also register with Health Canada and receive a license to grow, which includes the amounts they may grow. Large grow producers who hold a different license than designated growers are strictly regulated by Health Canada and must comply with all the MCMPR regulations. As registration and monitoring is an extensive job, only large production growers are monitored, needing to follow all the above listed categories. Designated growers are not strictly monitored by Health Canada, and regulations 2, 3, and 4 are suggested and recommended procedures. This leaves communities with the consequences of any problems that may occur with these growers and in the hands of local government. Furthermore, the PPS does not address medical marijuana, deferring this matter to local municipalities to address if they so choose. If our community is to embrace any cannabis business, we need to actively ensure that the existing residents, most of whom have been here for several generations, will not be negatively impacted by such businesses. As a community, we need to be proactive in bylaw guidelines specific to this industry rather than reactive to a problem once it has occurred. The issue before us this evening is twofold. One, how do we as a community want to proceed in regards to medical marijuana growers? Two, specifically to this individual's application to the property of 1374 Port Davidson Road. If one reads the documentation provided to Council by Mr. Gar, prepared by Mr. Sullivan, it would seem that the rezoning of the property would appear to be in order and warrant the Council's approval. However, if we consider more closely Mr. Gar's plans and his existing actions since he has owned this property, we see many causes for concern and question his level of integrity. I have some photos with me as well. Since owning this property, he has shown very little care or concern for the property itself. He has allowed the property immediately around the buildings and house to look utterly disastrous by seldom cutting the grass. Secondly, and more importantly, is the fact that his field contains a huge amount of fleabane. For those of you who do not know, fleabane is an extremely dangerous and noxious weed for the agricultural community. A single plant can produce thousands of seeds which can affect agricultural fields many miles away. It is resistant to all known chemicals and can only be destroyed by manual uprooting, cutting down before seeds mature, or by being burned. Despite attempts to notify him of this problem, his field remains in this condition today. Then there is the fact that he went ahead and purchased greenhouse structures without considering what was required by our municipality in order to establish this business. Health Canada has provided extensive information for anyone inquiring about a cannabis business, which includes the requirement to contact all local governments. He was reluctant to tell the Portsmouth salesman his intended use of the greenhouse, as was stated in a previous meeting, and only did so when it was made clear that such structures could not be put up without applications being made to the municipality. As licenses to grow cannabis must be issued by Health Canada, and this process includes security checks, this means the process can take up to a year to have licenses issued. He has had more than sufficient time to learn and understand what he might need to do for this business he intends to establish in this community. The first meeting for this application occurred in July 2017, and his license's issue date is that same month. Then, at this meeting, where he could have voiced his plans vocally, neither he nor his son bothered to attend. If they were not able to attend that particular meeting, I am quite sure the town would have been willing to reschedule for another time. Instead, they sent an ill-informed representative, the salesman who sold them the greenhouses. Town council was generous to this individual and retabled the matter for another meeting due to the language barrier and the scant information available from this applicant. At this time, he would have been more than aware that he could not establish his business at this location until a rezoning was obtained. Yet, in the month of August, Mr. Gar seriously invested money in having his hydro service upgraded to accommodate his future increased electrical needs. As he had no rezoning of this land and no permission to grow based on the requirements of our municipality, or the regulations of the ACMPR that he is required to follow, there was no rush or immediate need to invest in this upgrade at this time. However, it was Mr. Gar's intention to ignore these requirements and do whatever he wants. Mr. Gar proceeded to plant a crop of cannabis in the existing barn on the property, which you can see a photo up top there. Prior to the planting of this crop, Mr. Gar's property appeared abandoned, and the only activity observed at this location was the occasional attempt to cut the grass and fetch the mail. Activity on the property increased as the hydro was upgraded and vehicles and people began to be observed on a more regular basis. Then light became visible in the barn for great periods of time, including all night. The particular photo that's up right now is a photo that was taken, I think, around 7 o'clock in the morning. So you can see the lights on there. If you pan to the next photo. Yeah, that one there. That's a photo that I took at about 1:40 in the morning. And you can see the doorway is open. The light is coming out that door and then causing a reflection on the secondary building that's behind there. Light became visible in the barn for great periods of time, including all night. Doors to the barn were left open at times when no one appeared to be present, including all through the night. And there's another couple of photos that was also provided by the neighbors who were up beforehand. They've given you copies. And that shows the doors open and no one around, no vehicles even parked in the driveway. An unmistakable odor of marijuana began to permeate the air surrounding this property and remained in the vehicles of anyone passing for some time. Sometime after this, the crop was harvested or removed, as a greater increase of people could be seen at the site, and the increase in vehicles, including a full-size U-Haul rental van and a U-Haul rental cube truck. A vehicle was also observed backed into the far back door. The property once again appears to be deserted. Although I could easily have entered the barn on this property and provided complete proof of a crop grown in the barn, I feel these pictures above and the observations made by multiple residents is sufficient proof of this crop. What is not known is how many plants were harvested, how any of those plants were destroyed, as usually buds is the desired harvest, or where they have been distributed. To suggest that the odor observed on this site, on one of the reports provided by Mr. Sullivan, was simply a result of people smoking inside the buildings is not only an attempt to deceive this community, but insult our intelligence, devalue our concerns, and place the neighbors at risk. At his own admission, Mr. Gar has no intention of residing at the residence on the property and has renters residing in the residence during the growing of the crop. I am concerned that this will result in very little knowledge of what occurs on his property and over his product, resulting in grave risk. After all, according to an article I reviewed from a cannabis business organization, theft remains chief among the concerns for a cannabis grower, including from their own employees. Already, it would seem that his attention to detail is lacking or intentionally disregarded. He indicates that he intends to utilize the existing structures, but neglects to include for the specifics of their use. As these buildings would not be included behind the proposed fence or follow the setback guidelines, his usage of these buildings must be restricted to not store drying marijuana plants, harvested buds, the germination of seeds, or the rooting of clone plants, packaging of the dry product for shipment, or any other aspect directly associated to a cannabis product. To do so would be to violate the township's requirement necessary to obtain the rezoning, as well as pose increased risk not only to his business, employees, and renters, but also surrounding neighbors who are raising their families in this community. Further, Mr. Gar's site plan of 15 greenhouses are capable of housing much more than 976 plants necessary for his production license. My research indicates that all the known 105 varieties of cannabis, their heights fall into 3 basic categories: 30 inches or less, 30 inches to 78 inches, and 78 inches or taller. In a marijuana horticultural book, they recommend on average to allow 1 square yard per mature plant, which translates to 9 square feet. That means that a single 24 by 150 foot structure, as is proposed by the applicant, could potentially house 400 plants. If we take the time to draw out potential detailed grow layouts, which account for some workspace and reasonable spacing accounting for the plants, needs a single structure could reasonably house as few as 100 plants for the larger varieties and up to a max of 300 or more for the shorter varieties. This places his needed space for his 4 licenses, of which he can obtain no more, at a much lower requirement than he is proposing. Although a site-specific plan control is an excellent idea and a must for all marijuana applications, it only addresses the concerns at the time of building the facility and has no ongoing supervision, which I feel is a must for designated growers. It is very easy for growers to produce much more plants than what is on their licenses, as well as engage in self-propagation or destroying plants in an unhealthy manner, or not at all. Local news recently reported of greenhouses in Beesville was proven to engage in growing beyond their license limits. Regular inspections from an appointed town representative would help to ensure all regulations are adhered to and the safety and the health of the community is protected on all fronts. Any cannabis business which seeks to conduct business in a responsible manner sensitive to the concerns of the community is located in should have no worries with this requirement. Although the applicant is willing to include charcoal filters to reduce odor, the site plan of 15 separate structures and the need to transport product outside to a harvesting, drying, storage building seems to indicate that these filters will be unlikely to reduce the smell. As well, I have personal experience with how difficult it is to seal and vent these structures, further suggesting that the charcoal filters may be insufficient. Furthermore, according to our town's bylaw, point 23.3, the site design does not adhere to the requirement of a wholly enclosed building for all growing, production, and storage associated with medical marijuana. All these considerations indicate to me that this council ought to deny this individual's application to have the property rezoned to allow cannabis production. To approve this application for rezoning, council would have to overturn several points on their existing bylaws, including the wholly contained building and security fencing. To amend the bylaw in order to pass this rezoning and allow this individual to suffer no consequences for breaking our bylaw and Health Canada's requirements of the NCPAR, would demonstrate to the residents of this community that our municipal bylaws are irrelevant and our justifiable concerns are illegitimate. Is a community where anyone can do whatever he wants, whenever he wants to, be a good place to reside or conduct business? Town council has been appointed by the existing residents of this community to carry the responsibility to develop, protect, and guide our community in the best interests of its existing residents. This business from this applicant provides very little economic advantage to this community and in fact holds high potential to place the residents of this community at risk. In addition, I've handwritten a couple other comments that came to me as I heard other things. Mr. Sullivan mentions that the plan is to grow between mid-May and mid-October. As I do greenhouse growing with other plants, I know personally that mid-May can still be very cold at times, that you are going to require to temporarily heat the structure, and that is also possible mid-October. Mid-May is probably more of a concern because at that time the plants would be very small and the possibility of loss of those plants would be much greater. As well, a comment on the photos of examples that Mr. Sullivan provided. The photos that he provided of similar greenhouse businesses in the area demonstrate greenhouse structures that are not 15 or less separate structures, but structures that are all completely connected and that the product is completely contained within essentially a four-walled structure. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mrs. Jansen. Is there anyone else wishing to come forward at this time? Mr. Treble, you do have copies of the paperwork given to the clerk, the petition, et cetera? Okay. Sorry, go ahead.
Hi, I'm Eileen Deek. I live at 6421 Silver Street, around the corner from the property. I didn't prepare anything, but a few things have come to mind as I listened. One of them is about the licensing. There was no, or I didn't see, expiration dates on licensing. When do they have to be reapplied for? And if the reapplication is for July of next year, is that going to change the licensing? Are they going to go into a different type of licensing? Or are there restrictions on what they can grow here? Is it only medical, or come next year, can they switch that over to recreational? As well, I had a concern about the bleaching process that they use. Is that going to affect the soil? They said they wanted to use the surrounding land for a farmer to be able to use. If they're bleaching, that's going to cause damage to the soil surrounding. Environmental studies should be done then in that case. Proper control of the items when they are disposed should be dealt with as well, and how is that all going to affect the surrounding property? My last question is actually a question, and I don't know if the town council can answer that or not. How does a marijuana grow facility actually benefit our community? We know there's all the negatives. I have yet to hear positives. And it would be nice to hear a positive, because if it goes through and we haven't heard any positives, it kind of makes us wonder. And I don't want the answer, well, it's a medical product. I work in the medical field, and don't tell me marijuana is a beneficial medical product. I've only seen adverse reactions to it. So that was my last one, is it beneficial to our community? And as an agricultural zoned area, agricultural taxes are not as high as residential. So how is that going to pay for the land and the roads that will be damaged in all the back and forth of building this as well? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Anyone else wishing to come forward? Seeing none, I have to remind you, okay, that this may be the only public meeting held with respect to this application. Therefore, any members of the public who would like to make comments and or provide written comments should state them or present them now, as the OMB may not consider comments made during any other council or committee meetings. Anyone wishing to speak are required to come forward to the microphone at the table at this time. Seeing none, I'm going to confine this discussion to table, which means that councillors, members of the committee, it is now time for you to have questions, concerns, or items brought forward. And I'm seeing every hand around the table. So would you mind if I just started one side and went around? We'll all get a chance? Cool. Either that or I go by ward or by number. So Councillor Bell, I saw your hand first.
Well, be patient, because I got a few things to say. I guess I'll just start with what was given to us to read and review, and I'm just going to give Cole's notes version of it. The page 154 of the report, it talks about under designated grower provisions, Health Canada requires that the grower observes all provincial, regional, and local bylaws. This has been confirmed through consultation with lawyers. Obviously, they're not conforming. They apparently, according to documents, they do have a license to grow or be the designated grower. But with that being said, they haven't met all the requirements, so that makes their license void. It's useless. It's really not a license at this point. 156, 57, they talk about Health Canada. The justice and the ministry requirements, again, they talk about what's expected, and it's expected they obey all federal, provincial, and municipal laws and bylaws. Obviously, they're not doing that. Justification planning report from Mr. Sullivan. He talks about quite a few different things. He talks about the ventilation, charcoal filters. I don't believe it's going to meet the government laws that are set out, because greenhouses of that nature, you cannot control the temperature in them. It's impossible to control the temperature without ventilation to the outside. So in a hot summer day or the sun beating down, how are they going to control that temperature other than ventilation to the outside? So, there's just 159 is a conclusion. The details of the site layout, he talks about that would be finalized through a site plan application if the zoning bylaw amendment is approved. In the specific case, I would want to see the site plan application before the zoning bylaw was amended or is approved. Just so many uncertainties here. Page 199, the PBS, the definition of development. Technically, he says it himself, yeah, this is a land change that they're applying for, and it talks about that in page 199. Page 210, personal and designated production. They talk about that in there. And again, it makes sure everyone's back to obeying all the rules, federal, provincial, municipal bylaws. That's not being adhered to. They're not doing it. It's that simple. Health Canada expectations talks about individuals who are registered with Health Canada to produce a limited amount of cannabis for medical purposes are expected to obey all federal, provincial, municipal laws and bylaws. Again, this is information that's put out by the government. Safe disposal, and I'm not sure why this paragraph made it under the safe disposal. We have confirmed that the applicant has 4 individual licenses to produce medical grade marijuana that have effective dates of July 4th, July 11th, July 12th, and July 17th of 2017. So I'm not sure how that got into that category, but it's there. And anyway, 212, 213, the analysis. There was a comment made in there by Mr. Sullivan, often misunderstood industry. It is, at least in this instance. I'm not sure what he meant by that, or that was just his own personal opinion of our community. He goes on, 214, talks about the medical purposes and regulations. Again, it refers back to the applicant and how the stuff is grown in the rules and regulations. Talks about water and sewer servicing. Greenhouse staff will be using the existing washroom facilities. They're located in the dwelling or in the existing outbuildings. As no new water or sewage systems are proposed with this application, it meets acceptable plan and policy. Further clarity on the servicing could be addressed via site plan control, which would confirm location, size, and other factors. And when I read that kind of a statement, it just tells me that you have much bigger plans for this property moving forward. You're not being forthcoming when you make a statement like that. 215, you talk about smell and odor. This is under that category, and 2 site visits have been made to the subject property. One was on a Tuesday morning and the other was on a Friday afternoon. During both visits, there was no smell from the property other than the crop smell from the neighboring properties. If any smell was noticed, it was embedded in the residence, which is occupied by guests of the applicant. And earlier it said that they were renters. There's an awful lot of renters in that property, I'll tell you that. And then he makes a statement as to what occurs in a private residence is a private matter. With what's been going on there, this comment alone just tells me and suggests to me that something illegal it's taken place in that address. And like I said earlier, they talked about Community safety, the operation is private with no public access permitted. Only those individuals with a license to grow at this location will be permitted access. The licenses noted are from Toronto and Markham as their locations. Is there a highly unlikely that one or more of these licensees would visit the property? And respectfully, I suggest that they may want to look for property down Toronto or Markham Way. There's a lot of land north of that, two areas. Not sure why they come to West Lincoln, to be honest with you. You talk about page 216, loss of property value, and you go on how it doesn't affect property value. You mentioned the author. He's brought and sold several properties in recent examples. The vendor discloses form noted to be completed questions about marijuana production. You go on to say that it's the applicant that's taken the chance, not the property owners. In short, you say that he's the one that's going to lose the price on the sale of the property, not the residents. I'm not sure where you're getting them comments from. I really believe you're way off base on them. Crops other than medical marijuana, it's recommended the Niagara Regional Place. They need to be advised what's going on here. I really do believe that. You talk about future facility and growth, and what they're doing now, they're in violation of the licenses they hold. There's no doubt in my mind, just reading this stuff and being out there. I travel by it quite frequently. You go on about stuff, and I listen to what the residents are saying. There's a lot of key things that are being said. For myself personally, at this point in time, I would like to see staff be directed to contact the government agencies that are dealing with this licensing, make them aware of what's been going on this property to date, and that they're in violation of the license, and they're growing even though they're in violation of it. They shouldn't be doing anything out there until they've been granted full okay. And also, Niagara Regional Police need to be made aware of what's happening there, that they're growing illegally. They may have a medical license, but it's not a valid medical license. And we as a community, and us as representing our community, we need to do these two things for sure and get answers. And I strongly suggest to council that they deny this application tonight. Thank you.
Mr. Treble, tonight's report is a technical report. Right. So
Sorry, it's a technical report, that's correct.
This is not the evening on which we will be denying or approving.
Staff are not recommending anything tonight.
Okay. I just want to make sure that we're on the same page there. A number of public still think they have another meeting. I'm sorry, Councillor Bell. I just want to make
that. I just want council to be on side with it.
I understand.
Moving forward, you have to deny this. Sorry.
Okay, Councillor Bellsma. Well, I'm sorry, I called your name up first. If Councillor Trumpet, if you'd like to go first. Okay. Thank you. Councillor Billsma, you've got the floor.
I think he insulted him. Anyways.
No one insulted him. He's not at
He's
all.
much more handsome.
Okay, let's get to your points.
Yeah, no, you know what? It was probably a decent thing that Councillor Bell went first, because he was very, very thorough. And he went through the report very, very well. My concern, or my questions are directed to whoever can answer them with regards to some of the complaints that have been circulated by some of the residents who have come forward. Is there an investigation or is there a transgression here on this property that's being investigated? Have the cops, have the policemen been notified? Is there anything ongoing that proves or establishes the veracity of what the residents, are there complaints outstanding? maybe some information with respect to that. Thank you.
Perhaps I can help here, Councillor Bilsma. Mr. Treble, have our own bylaw officers had to attend the property due to complaints, and has there been any actions taken beyond that?
Through you, Madam Chair, yes, bylaw enforcement has been involved in this property. They have been to the property for the purposes of dealing with complaints of smell emanating from the buildings on site, confirm the presence of product that was not permitted by the zoning bylaw. There was an order to remove, and they cooperated to the best of my understanding, and as of early last week, all of the product was supposed to have been removed from the property.
So there has been, as some of the members of the public have commented, there have been complaints, there have been actions taken on those complaints. I've received a number of those calls, and I know that there's been action. So now, that's what the township has done.
Yes.
Niagara Region's finest are not here, so they can't explain what it is that they've done.
Is there, so my question is there a mechanism that's already been initiated or a protocol that's been initiated because of what was discovered through the bylaw officer and such? Like, is there, were police involved?
Mr. Treble, can you answer that within the confines of what it is that you're aware of?
There's a couple of points, I guess, Madam Chair, I can say. I understand that individuals in the community approached the police. I also am of the understanding that enforcement of zoning bylaw infractions, which is technically what we have here, are not generally police matters.
Right.
So at this particular point in time, I believe that our bylaw enforcement staff may be the only enforcement that are active, but I can't say that with certainty.
Okay, so I'm a little confused here because we have a public meeting here tonight for the purposes of an application that's on the books, and yet, to my understanding, there should be no presence of marijuana on the site, and yet we've got a confirmation that product has been on the site. And so I'm assuming that product on that site is already illegal, because you can't have product on a site, especially if an application's still, in
Pending.
pending process,
Pending.
so all these kinds of things. So my concern was it illegal for product to even exist on this site, as it would say on my site? Or,
So, Councillor Bilsma,
yeah,
what we have been told is that they are not in compliance of zoning, which makes it a bylaw infraction. That's the town's jurisdiction. They have permits to grow marijuana, but they must comply, as Councillor Bell has pointed out, to all municipal, provincial, and federal law. That's what's supposed to happen. But our bylaw officer attended at the site, found product, asked for its removal in order to comply with our zoning bylaw. It was apparently now removed, according to Mr. Treble's latest investigation by the bylaw officers. Where it went, we can't confirm.
okay.
But to date, that, and I believe, Mr. Treble, I'm not overspeaking you, but I'm trying to keep you in a safe place.
No, and
so
I
the
appreciate
bylaw,
the clarity, yes.
the bylaws were, there was a bylaw offense. The bylaw officers went to the property. They examined the property, were given access to some of the buildings, and issued an order to comply. The order to comply was completed as our staff have determined.
Okay, so I appreciate the clarity, because I had some questions with regards to that. Now I'm kind of understanding exactly the nitty-gritties of what's legal and what's been transgressed.
And I'm not trying to be
No,
circumspect. I'm trying to keep us in where we got jurisdiction.
And I appreciate that, and I'm also reading in between the lines.
Good.
So that again, I don't want to reiterate anything that Councillor Bell already did. My questions with regards to the transgressions that have already been on the property and how they were rectified and who was notified and so on and so forth. So for now, my questions are answered. Thanks.
Sorry, you caught me in the middle of pouring my water.
okay.
I'd love one.
Oh, just one final. Can we throw the air conditioner on?
I don't think so.
Oh, my goodness.
Our exhaust fans aren't working.
That feels like a grow-up. in here.
We might have. Okay. And with that levity, Councillor Ganan, you have the floor.
Thank you. I also am happy that Councillor Bell went first, but I do have some questions, and I'm not sure who's best to answer them, whether through you, Madam Chair, Mr. Treble can answer, or whether it should go to Mr. Sullivan. I have concerns, as I looked also at the Health Canada website and at the licenses that were provided in our package, and I see that you have a choice. With a medical marijuana license, you can grow for yourself, or you can have a designate, somebody who will grow for you. And so, I mean, everywhere I read, that seems to be the way that it is. However, on each of the 4 licenses that were submitted to us that for perusal, under the place where you are to name the designate, it has an NA for not applicable. So as I read through all of this information, there is no way that I could figure out, either from looking at all of the information, and I appreciate the work that Mrs. Jansen went to as well, because I also tried to go through all of those websites and get information. I could not figure out who would be ultimately responsible for keeping that spot up to the standards that it's supposed to be. If it were to go through, I don't know who would be ultimately responsible for making sure that it was secure and that it was safe and that things were kept in proper order and proper perspective, that it was vented properly. If the person who is living there is not the owner of the property, and we don't know who that person is, right now they're just listed as guests, there's no bottom line here that I can see in terms of if there were further problems, if it was to go beyond where it is, I don't see an avenue for arriving at the knock on the door of the person who's supposed to say, oh yes, it's my job to keep things in perspective. Mr. Treble, am I missing something there somewhere, or probably Mr. Sullivan might be able to address that?
Let's go through Mr. Treble first, and he'll defer to Mr. Sullivan. How's that?
Through you, Madam Chair, it's an interesting point with respect to the name of designated person on the license, so I would suggest that Mr. Sullivan can maybe speak to that. The one thing I guess that I think everyone's referring to, and I will confirm, should there be the possibility that this application is to be approved, there will definitely be site plan control based on the size and scale and scope of the proposal before us. And site plan control is an opportunity to enter into a binding agreement with the owner of the land. So our obligations would be imposed upon the owner of the land, who would then be responsible for ensuring compliance with our expectations. And whether the owner lives there or not, we just enter the agreement with the owner. That's the easiest way, and it's the most binding way to proceed forward. So I believe that's Mr. Shejorgao that is the owner in question. But why his name does not show up in the designated space in these applications from Health Canada, I don't know.
Well, further to that, if I may, Madam Chair, the registration form that needs to be filled out is much longer than the single page that we got back that shows what this official license was. And there is a whole Annex B section indicating where you need to put in the designated person's information, all kinds of contact information, where they're going to be growing it, whether they live there, whether it's their residence. I mean, there are very, very specific things that need to be filled out. So it makes me question if the government is asking for all of this information, wanting to know, for example, the designated grower, are they going to be planting indoors or outdoors or partly in and partly out, why we would get back something that is a license that says not applicable. For me, that it sounds like something that the government has put in place, assuming that somebody is going to be growing their own medical marijuana, or will say to their neighbor, you have more property, would you please be my designate and grow this for me? I'm not sure that that it was ready to be imposed upon a municipality such as ours. And then I guess the next part of that that's sort of going into that is when we're looking at rezoning, it makes me wonder why the rezoning isn't just the specific part of the property as opposed to rezoning the entire property. Why, if we were going to even consider this, wouldn't we be looking at the area that's designated on the maps in terms of what they feel is necessary for their growing operation to produce medical marijuana, why we're looking at this entire property? And then further to that, I think, who investigates the noxious weed that's there? And can we also, as a municipality, do something about that? Because that's a legitimate concern, I think, for the local residents who are planting crops. So a few complicated issues together, I know, but all coming out of the same issue.
I can start, Madam Chair, perhaps with the last question first. I'm not the expert in the Noxious Weeds Act, but Steve McGean from the Township Public Works Department was approached, consulted with an expert, and as well as Ministry of Ag and Food staff, and we're not able to get confirmation that this product is deemed a noxious weed. So I'm not sure, it certainly sounds like it should be a noxious weed, but there didn't seem to be any legislation that gave Steve the authority to order its removal or destruction or whatever the proper approach is. So that's something that I think is still an ongoing issue out there. We haven't necessarily given up on it, but it is of concern. The one other question that was posed was around the way the property should be zoned, and I think those are matters that staff will be deliberating on in terms of what kind of report comes back before this committee. It's certainly clear from one of the drawings that if we zone the whole of the property, there is potential that they could try and produce or grow more, and it was illustrated that there is room to do so within the 150-meter buffer, and perhaps we simply try and limit the area to a specific area or portion of the property. The other piece I was investigating as we've had these public meetings tonight, and this Hamilton bylaw that was referred to with respect to the accessory and on-farm diversified landscaping and nursery issue also has a piece in there about marijuana, medical marijuana facilities, I noticed. So this is a Hamilton observation I'm making. They have a maximum of 2,000 square feet of building per property as a limitation when it comes to the use of land for medical marijuana purposes. So
I'm sorry, how much was that?
2,000 square meters, which is roughly 20,000 square feet, just for simple math. So that limitation was an interesting thing that jumped out at me when I was looking at that. We don't have anything of that comparable in our bylaw at this point in time. So I think there was another question.
So reviewing our bylaw
Madam
might
Chair.
be something that is coming out of.
Okay, that was the next part of mine. Further to that, then, is there a plan for staff to review our bylaw based on the changes in society and what's going on around us?
Madam
And
Chair.
if there isn't, can there be?
When?
Soon.
I pulled the original report that staff put together in 2014 when the current medical marijuana provisions were put in place. And it says in that report that planning staff will monitor the number of site-specific applications to determine the strategy of our zoning regulations and possible revisions to the zoning approach, and that a report would be provided to a future committee. So certainly there was an indication that some sort of ongoing monitoring and review should occur. That hasn't happened yet, but this is technically, I think, the first official application we've had under these regulations since they were put in place. So I think we contemplated that we may not have got the provisions right the first time, and that they're always open for review. So I take some direction from committee in that regard if there is a need to do some sort of review of the regulations if there is concern. I think it's safe to say those revisions would not necessarily apply to this application, but could apply on a going forward basis.
So as we deal with the application, with the report later in the agenda, that would be a very appropriate place for some of my colleagues to perhaps put forward a suggestion or a direction to staff, which I think is all it would take, is a direction to staff. In fact, we can do it now. That basically, Council, Mr. Treble, we're suggesting, I think I'm seeing a lot of nods around the table, that direction should be given to you to undertake that review. We will do, you're right, this is a public meeting still, so we'll do that during the planning meeting as well. Councillor Gannon did ask about where the rest of the application was. I'm not sure that we were able to answer that. We were given the first page that had a number of non-applicables. So it left us with doubt as to whether or not who was responsible.
Madam Chair, I would have to defer to Mr. Sullivan on that particular question.
Mr. Sullivan, if you could be so kind. Sorry, I think there was another question, Councillor Gannon.
Madam Chair, for committee's benefit, I understand that with the individual registrant process and saying NA, it is the registrant person themselves who is in charge, who is also the designated person for growing. So my understanding from my client just now is that the individual registrant will rent space from my client, from this facility, and grow their licensed requirement on premises there. That's my understanding.
Hold it.
So further to that.
Go ahead.
Does that mean that each of those people are going to be driving out, supposedly then planting their own plants and looking after the growth of their own plants?
Can you possibly answer that? So will each registrant be going to your property and planting and maintaining their?
Yeah, that's right. If we are the designated, when they apply the license.
Can we ask you, sorry, to come to the microphone? This is being taped, and for the benefit of those that will watch it on YouTube.
This when the patient they apply for the license on the application, they will ask, do you growing for yourself or are you growing for the designated person? So if we are the designated person, at the point we will put our name on it. So we are not the one growing it. They are the one responsible for them growing. Okay?
I think not. No. I think Councillor Gannon has a question for clarity, and if she doesn't, I will. Because you are the grower, growing on behalf of the designated person?
No, I'm not the grower.
You're not the grower.
My dad just bought the property.
Yes.
And we don't know so much rule about the bylaw stuff, and then just like we try to rent the people who want to grow. So and then later on we find out we have to apply for the greenhouse permit for that. So and then later on we just tell the truth that what they use, and then that's all come up.
Don't go away. Councillor Gannon would like to ask now. I was trying to get clarity.
Okay. Well, as I read through the rules and the regulations, if Councillor Bell had a medical problem and needed to have some form of medical marijuana, he would personally apply through his doctor for the right to grow that.
Yeah.
Right? And then the designate is if he said, I don't have enough property at my house to do it, so I'm going to ask Councillor Billsma to grow it at his property because he has more property. That's the designate.
No.
So, but that is what the regulations say. Right? That is what the regulations say. They say you can grow it for yourself, or you can designate somebody else to grow it. So if you are looking at this differently, if you are saying, oh no, we're just renting them property, and then they would have to come on their own regularly, daily, and maintain that from mid-May till mid-October and look after that and do all of that work. Is that what you say is happening?
Yes.
I doubt it. I'm sorry.
Okay.
Further to that, Councillor.
So we are not-
I do believe
You
we're
may
going
have
to.
a bit more.
We may be exploring that later, but I will defer to the end of these roundtables. I would think that both of you should stay there. This is getting a little more interesting. By the way, the temperature's dropping in here. Councillor Trombetta, you're welcome.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Obviously, there's a lot of questions that are still need a lot of answering on this issue. I have one, which I thought about and it never came up. The exhaust of these buildings, obviously plants pollinate, and there's a lot of exhaust coming out. What effect does it have on the agricultural property that's surrounding it? Does that, cross-contaminate the agricultural properties? Does it make good for growth? So these are a lot of questions that I have and myself that I think that will harm our vast agricultural land that we have out here by putting one of these massive facilities there. This is a big facility that's proposed, and like I said, there's not proper exhaust. Like you're saying it exhausts, but that exhaust still goes into the field, still goes into the corn crop, still goes into the soybean crops, and so on in the winter wheat and everything else. That is a big issue that I'm having, because that is going to really damage a lot of the neighboring agricultural properties and affect a lot of major people in this area. Again, there's a lot of questions, a lot of ups and downs with these types of things, and there's a lot of unknowns, and for that reason, I will not, I know this is a public meeting, but I will not be in favor.
You're looking for a lot more answers.
Absolutely, Madam Chair. And I think there's a lot more time that we need. And like I said, I know it's a public meeting, but I'm not in support, and I'm just making a comment right now during this public meeting that I'm not in support of this. There's a lot of farmers that are going to get affected of this, and it is a big tragedy if that were to happen. So thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Rayner.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I came here tonight with an open mind, wanting to listen to what was being said, trying to get a clear understanding of what the presentation was going to be, and then, of course, having the opportunity to listen to the people who actually are going to live around this situation and what their reactions are going to be. And I found tonight to be, every one of these when in planning tonight has been kind of shocking and surprising and not normal, shall we say. Let's start with this one. Mr. Sullivan made a very nice presentation, shall we say a theoretical, rosy presentation of what theoretically should happen in this facility. And I listened to it and I thought, well, you know, what they're saying so far, it looks like they're trying to cover everything. And then all of a sudden the public comes up and the public starts saying, well, hold on a minute, the lights are on all the time. I'm smelling this all the time. Now I would like to go through the chair to Mr. Treble. Mr. Treble, am I correct in saying that this process we're going through right now is the start prior to the growing, and they do not have authority to grow anything on this property until they have met all the guidelines and things have been passed through committee and council of this township first?
Madam Chair, that would be correct. Their bylaw is structured, it requires a zoning application to be approved.
Thank you. Thank you. So my question is, what the heck is going on there right now? This makes absolutely no sense. This is the cart way before the horse. And then I have to go back to the credibility of the planner. And through the chair to Mr. Sullivan, you've heard what these people have been saying tonight. You represent your client with regards to presenting the best picture in order to get approval. Were you not aware, sir, in your investigations and everything, of what was going on, which appears to be, based on what Mr. Treble said, an illegal grow-up operation prior to any approval for something here that was supposed to be legal?
Madam Chair, may I address that?
Mr. Sullivan, please do. And I'll try and keep this in the confines of civility, okay? But I do think that our council is expressing the frustration and the concerns we have of your client to date. So if you'd like to address that and answer Councillor Rayner, it would be appropriate.
Madam Chair, I'm hearing the message loud and clear from members of the committee, and I certainly respect that position, and I'm trying to address it as best I can. As staff said and Mr. Treble said, there was an issue with bylaw enforcement, and I had confirmed through my client, through discussion with my client, and very strong language to him, that the growing of the planting and growing of marijuana plants in advance of receiving permission from Township Council was illegal. As a result of that, that was because of the bylaw enforcement complaint and the investigation. As a result of that, I have confirmed through bylaw enforcement, I have an email from them received earlier, late last week, I should say, that all plants had been removed from the property. My client is well aware that there is no permission granted to grow product on the property. His initial explanation to me on the first contact was it was his understanding that the federal regulations applied and wasn't aware of the connection to the municipal laws. I have corrected him on that position. My apologies to the committee for any misunderstanding there.
Madam Chair, a couple things.
I want to make sure Mr. Sullivan is done. Sorry, Councillor Rayner, we don't want to cut him off.
I also wanted to, if I may, just, where's it on here? In terms of addressing that specific question, that's the end of my answer.
Thank you. Councillor Rayner, you still have the floor.
Thank you. Therefore, Mr. Sullivan, you acknowledged that there was an illegal grow-op operation there, and you as the planner was representing them, knowing potentially at any time they could have been charged under the Criminal Code of Canada. Had they been charged and convicted of that, would they still have been allowed under Health and Welfare Canada to grow something with a criminal record?
Madam Chair, through you, I was unaware that the illegal growing was occurring when I had written my report. The report was submitted to the township prior to my being aware of the illegal growing occurring. That I can confirm.
Okay.
So if I was aware of the illegal operations prior to it, I would have included that. I would have addressed that.
I'm just of the feeling right now that I'm wondering why you went ahead and presented tonight, knowing the background exists that kind of shot a million holes to the credibility of your presentation, and me being foolish enough to be unbiased in this, to start with, trying to respect everybody who makes a presentation and believe their honesty and integrity, to find this the biggest example in my longest term as a councillor in this township of an illegal operation and a planner trying to allow this to continue, knowing that he should have walked away. Like that's just my opinion right now, and I'm not at all pleased with this situation, nor have I ever experienced this in the 11 years I've been sitting here. This really bothers me. The other thing was mentioned about bleaching the plants so that they could not be sold. If you're going to bleach them, you're going to use sodium hypochlorite. Sodium hypochlorite is extremely alkaline. It probably has a pH of 12, maybe even 14. If they put that on the field, which they probably don't care because they got flea blade growing like crazy out there and they don't care about the land, they are really going to do some serious damage to that land. And based on what we see out there right now, and you said in your presentation that there would be very few people going on the property because it's going to be controlled, and once it's packaged, it's just going to be in there. For what I hear from the people out there, there's been an army of people going in and out of this place. So, I mean, again, the total credibility of your presentation has got more holes in it than Swiss cheese. The next thing that really bothers me is your presentation mathematically. If I'm not mistaken, did you not say that there were 65 plants per greenhouse and 15 greenhouses?
Madam Chair, that's my understanding, yes.
Okay, but you said there were 976 plants. An odd number multiplied by an odd number will never give an even number. How do you get 976 plants multiplying 65 by 15? Even the mathematical presentation doesn't add up. So this whole thing, and the fact that, as Councillor Bell said, basically it's somebody from Hogtown, as we call it, because I'm born and raised in Hamilton as a Ticat, coming down here and dumping on us, and then staying away from it over 100 kilometers to stay away from the situation. That's what it feels like. But basically this whole thing, and I am amazed that if the people have not contacted the police, that there has not been a raid on this facility, and this facility should have been shut down a long time ago, and you shouldn't be here because you'd be too embarrassed to say these people are going to be in front of the courts. I am totally blown away by this whole thing. I can't believe it's even in front of us. I can't believe we're even wasting our time listening to it because it's not even a resident of this township that's applying for this. But anyways, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Rayner. I have a couple questions before we go around the table, and I believe that we are going to have to take a very short break, as we do mostly. But if you will indulge me, the expiry date on these licenses, access to cannabis for medical purposes, is the 3rd, the 10th, the 10th, and the 17th of next year. You are planning on putting together a rezoning, which we are the second technical meeting, which could result in a second, but that leads also to site plan and the construction of greenhouses that are required to have anchor posts put into the ground because these are hoop houses with a fabric over top. How are you going to get those up and get everything done and growing by the 17th of February, to give you the latest date?
Madam Chair, I can't speak to the operations or getting them established. I cannot speak to that. What I can simply say from this side is that my client has the risk of getting everything in place and getting operations up and going prior to that date. And if Health Canada does not renew his application as of February of next year, there's a renewal requirement, and if they don't renew, it's his expense, his risk.
So we had no one arrive here in July. We had a very, very uninformed person come. And we gave you the benefit of the doubt. And yes, I would say that we are saddened and very, very unhappy about the fact that when residents complained to me and to other councillors, we sent our bylaw officers out and found marijuana growing outside the parameters of our zoning bylaw. So for us, the only law that we have to apply to this application has been violated. We've had problems with weeds, and we've been told that it skims under the noxious weeds. Now I'm hearing that I'm not sure that I'm talking to the people who are going to handle this thing. I guess I've got a landlord here with his planner, because it's not these people here who are the owners of the cannabis who are going to grow the cannabis. Is there a professional grower that will grow this cannabis, that will be on site to watch this site, about the leachate, about the fact that there's no second sanitary system, about the fact that any greenhouse has a holding tank or pond system to filter out the nauseousness of the fertilizers and or the bleach that is going to happen? Will there be a professional on site? I'm not sure that your client knows, because he's not the guy growing it, but help me out here.
I don't have too much knowledge, but as I know, if they grow, they just respond for themselves.
Okay, so can I ask you a question now that you've taken the microphone? I'm sorry to cut you off. You are not the grower.
No, I'm not the grower.
You will not be planting or harvesting.
No.
So it is not your marijuana.
No.
So you are renting your property to people who will use your property for growing marijuana.
Yes.
Medical marijuana. I apologize for not the full term. So if we need to talk to someone, who is it we should be talking to? And why is it that our bylaw officers were directed to you to remove the marijuana?
Because we are the landlord, right? They only contact us, right?
I don't know. I don't know. You have no rights according to these permits. So you're going to be, you're the landlord.
And then they find out, and then I got the call. So the day there's somebody on the site, and then the bylaw office just call, and then they find out.
So we're going to read between the lines, because your planner can't validate that there's no marijuana on the site, on the property at all. Do you own the house?
My dad owns the
Okay, so speaking on behalf of your father, or if you want, your dad can come up, is that house rented now?
Yeah.
Do you know?
It's still vacant because they.
Oh, it's vacant. So is there any marijuana on that property at all right now? In the house, in the barns, on the fields?
Zero plant.
I see. So who owned the marijuana that was growing in the shed? Because you've acknowledged, and we have certainty from someone, that there was marijuana on the property.
Because they're the tenant, right?
It was the tenants.
They come for this license, right?
Uh-huh.
I don't know, it's like, when the first meeting with him, it's Rand.
July?
Yeah. It's like, it says that the personal growing, you don't need to go to the municipal, and you don't need to go to the fire department, you don't need to go.
My colleague, Mr. Bell, Councillor Bell, went through the entire report that referred repeatedly, your planner referred to repeatedly the need to comply with bylaws and regulations of all government levels. So I'm not sure why.
They are not the license producer. If they are the license producer, before they get the license, they have to go through everything before they get the license. But this one is for the personal use, medical use. So they can, even though this license, if they apply in their apartment,
So, sir,
they still
you have a violation to zoning, and that's what we're talking about tonight in a meeting. Your property was in violation of our zoning bylaw. Do you understand that?
understand now.
Okay, so now we're going to go through a process. You are in violation of our zoning bylaw if you have any marijuana on your property until we give you a proper zoning. Do you understand that?
Understand.
Okay, because I'm not sure that we're finished here. And I'm sure not, because you've only opened the door to many other things. But I do believe that you've offered more questions than you have answers. So I know that was uncalled for. I apologize as chair of the meeting, but I did want to get some clarity to what I think was happening around the table. Normally, the chairman saves all questions till the end, and we go back and forth with members of committee. So I think we're going to have a lot more than that, Councillor Bell, but okay. You have the floor.
My question is very simple. We're dealing with the landlord.
Yeah.
The people that grow it,
Aren't here.
they don't exist. There's no names, there's nothing. So, why are we dealing with this application to rezone this property? Personally, in my opinion, this meeting's over.
Exactly.
Because
Well-
we're not dealing with any individuals. Who are we dealing with?
I think this is where I wanted to refer it back to staff. Councillor Bell, your point is well taken, because we have a landowner looking for a zoning variance, and we don't have the entirety of what's going on. So we can look at the meeting further on and establish what kind of criteria we're looking for when we get to the report. We can ask Mr. Treble where he feels we are, because we have an application for rezoning in front of us. Right.
Let me put the owner of the land has the right to make an application for rezoning. So whether the individuals that apparently are growing it are here or not, the owner still has the right to have that application considered. Having said that, though, the way that the information is structured, as we understand it, there's sort of two different types of licenses. And at the meeting that we held the first time back in July, we thought we were dealing with a licensed producer. It became evident once we met after the public meeting that there was not a licensed producer involved here. It was under this personal and designated production component that we were dealing with it, which is where it says that a person can produce a limited number of marijuana plants under a maximum of 2 registrations for one other person and him or herself or 2 other persons. Marijuana plants may be produced under a maximum of 4 registrations at one address. I suppose in there it doesn't really say who is growing the crop, although it was always my understanding that it was the individuals we were dealing with that were the growers of the crop on behalf of the people who have the Health Canada licenses. So there may be a misunderstanding at the staff level on that front. I'll put that on the table. The other thing I know is confusing, and this is not the only file, the chair of planning and CAO are 2 I know that are aware of another situation in the township where it becomes clear that people are of the opinion that the license from Health Canada is all they need. And I think we're all making it very clear that's not the case. The way the rules are set up in West Lincoln, there is an approval of this committee and council that is required. And that doesn't matter as long as it is a significant operation for the purposes of producing medical marijuana. So in this particular file, if it's going to happen, the owners have the right to make that application. Council must make a decision as to whether it's something you want to entertain on this property. I don't know that you need the growers in the room to do that.
Just don't stop there, though. In enforcement in the future, we have a rezoned piece of land that can be rented to anyone to grow anything.
But enforcement is with the owner.
So
We go after the owner of the land.
So if there's a violation, it's these people here that we have with us tonight that will be pursued to ensure that we have compliance with our bylaws and any other regulations that we can enforce.
The only people that we would have any way of knowing about are the owners. There could be a number of tenants or renters, and we would have no knowledge of that. So we go straight after the owner of the land in each case.
So I believe there are more questions. Is the will of council to take a 2-minute break? or did you want to continue, Councillor Trombetta?
I kind of concur with what yourself and, sorry, Councillor Bell said. Like, I don't know why we need to continue, Madam
It's a
Chair.
public meeting. We need to close the public meeting. We need to deal with the fact that we want to not deal with it
Just
later on.
because we do have a long agenda, there could be other members of the public that need to get to these other agendas.
In due process, to give process the appropriate place. Remember how we tell everybody about the OMB and the fact the process has to be adhered to? I unfortunately have to adhere to process to get us closure of this public meeting. When we get to the report on the agenda, you can give staff direction and do whatever you want. But right now, I have to close this public meeting. But I want to make sure that nobody else has any more questions. Councillor Bell, Councillor Bills Madhu.
No, I don't.
Oh, sorry.
I was agreeing with them.
So,
I will let Councillor Bell speak. I do have a couple more questions, if you will indulge me, once Councillor Bell has completed his questions.
so hearing what was just said by Mr. Treble, the owner's going to apply for the license. They're going to rent these,
Stalls.
yeah, growing areas out to anyone and everyone. There'll be traffic coming and going out of there, so it's, in essence, it's like having a red light district out in Port Davison. They just come and go at will, and we have no control who's coming, who's going. We don't know who they are. But if there's a problem, we'll call the guys down in Toronto, and they'll get here, and they'll deal with the issue. Like, totally unacceptable. I'm sorry. It is.
So, and I apologize for not saying your name correctly. Is it, your last name is?
Not last name, first name Wei, W-E-I.
Wait, sorry, then we'll go by way. You are putting up hoop houses that have no heat. Where are your tenants? Are you putting up a building for them to rent from you for the months of November to May?
Can I get the answer again?
Sorry. In the report of your consultant, this man, sorry, Mr. Sullivan, you're only growing from May until maybe October and or early November. These people who have licenses have them for 12 months.
Yep.
Takes 3 months for cannabis to go from seed to maturity.
Actually, maybe 6 months.
Okay, 6 months. Got to have more plants. What I read was 3, but I'm easy. No, don't put that out there. Anyway, the point is, where are they going to have these plants from November until May?
November until May.
November, it's too cold in the hoop house.
Yeah, so
Where are you going to put the plants?
I think in the site plan, there's the barn.
Ah, so you're starting to build the barn.
No, it's like
No.
on the
Madam Chair, if I can.
Sure, why don't you try?
In the ultimate build-out diagram, there was a showing of a future warehouse at that location.
Yes.
That's, I believe, where Wade is talking.
In addition to drying and processing and plant packaging. Okay. I mean, I have more questions than enough. These people have helped me immensely with greenhouse education. So you're telling me that as of now, you grow no more marijuana until next May on your land? Because they can't grow.
I think as for the limit.
What the chair is asking is no, you will not be growing from November until May. Is that correct?
No, they were still growing.
Where?
But your license says only indoors
Yeah.
in the greenhouses.
But the
And
barn,
then-
is it barn green?
No, see, barn is not in 150 feet from the front of property.
No, not the one. It's like, do you have the,
Oh.
can you show the?
Oh, you mean the new barn?
Yeah.
But it's not there now.
So there's no more plan now until they got the zoning.
Until that. Oh, okay. So there's no more marijuana going to grow on your land until you get proper zoning. And in the summer, in the warm months, you're going to plant it in the hoop houses, right? And in the winter, you're going to rent space to your tenants, licensed tenants, in this new shed. Warehouse.
Or
Thank
they
you.
can use the freestanding. They can put the heat on and then they can put the light.
You're going to put them back in the greenhouse.
I'm not sure what they're doing right now, but probably they just use the barn.
Okay, so you really aren't going to be in charge of leasing. You're just going to let these people run out there.
But
pay the rent, and then they can use whatever's out there
But
inside the
of course,
fence.
They have to follow the rule as they.
How are you going to know they're following the rules? I'm sorry to be so quick with questions, but you're making me ask more questions. Who is going to be there, make sure they're following the rules?
So what, like, let's say what kind of rule you want them to follow? So
The zoning bylaw, the number of plants, using the buildings, making sure there's no smells coming out of the buildings, making sure nothing is going outside the buildings that has has bleach on it, the bleach is not going on the land, all those questions. You know, everything we've heard.
Madam Chair, if I could interject for just a moment here.
I guess you could.
For the committee's benefit, I accepted this, I took this, Mr. Way on as a client when I understood what he was trying to do.
Okay?
The rules, my understanding of his operation has changed each and every week, pretty much,
Morphing.
morphing. Partly there's a language barrier, partly
Yes.
there's a cultural barrier.
Yes.
And at this point, based on what I'm hearing tonight, I've heard comments from the public that I had not considered previously. And that affects my opinion overall on the application. So I'm afraid, members of council or members of the committee, I cannot represent this application going forward in this current state. So I'm done.
So, sir, I respect your professional opinion, and all I'm trying to do is, since this is a public meeting, I am showing your ex-client that we have lots of questions that have to be served. And if I don't put them out there tonight, your client will expect, your ex-client will expect to have no more public meetings. I have a raft of them. So either your client understands he's coming back to another public meeting where he's got answers for what's there, and with the tolerance you've shown us already, if you could convey that to your client before you leave the chambers, that would be great, because this isn't over. But I'm willing to accept the fact that he's unrepresented here now, as of now, and therefore, we have nothing to do but to either adjourn the meeting or ask your client if he wishes to represent himself.
Fair enough. Thank you, Madam Chair.
I think we need to finish this for a second. Okay. Do you understand, sir, that we are here with you now and you have no planner with you, and that he can no longer represent you? Mr. Sullivan, for you to be here and represent yourself may be an injustice to your future here with the plan you have before us. I would like to adjourn this meeting. I have many more questions. Do you feel prepared to answer those? Or should we adjourn this meeting and reconvene at a future date when you have proper representation?
I will hire a proper representative.
So I am going to adjourn this meeting with your concurrence, waiting for you to get proper representation and return here with another report, and we will at that time reconvene this meeting.
Okay.
I believe that is appropriate, Mr. Treble. Before, Councillor Rayner, is it something to be done within the scope of the public meeting, because I'd like to adjourn it?
Yes, I would just like to make one comment.
Your mic isn't on. Your mic isn't on.
I would just like to thank Mr. Sullivan. He has obviously not known the whole situation, and it was brought out clearly tonight, but it takes a man of strong integrity and in the position he's in, the respect of other people, to the decision he made really.
I'm going to have
is
to cut
very
you off,
respectful
Council.
for
Thank
him.
you. Thank you,
Pardon?
Councillor Rayner. We need to stop that now.
That's
Okay.
fine. Thank you.
We appreciate all the actions that have taken place, and this is very, very unusual for a chair to adjourn a meeting, a public meeting. But again, I am adjourning the public meeting because we have lots more questions to ask, and you do not have proper representation, and I'm saying we'll adjourn this meeting to give you time to go and find proper representation. Are you in concurrence with that?
Yes.
Okay. Then I'm going to consider this meeting closed at 9:51 to be for another public meeting to be reconvened at the appropriate time in the future when our staff and you have the appropriate information to bring before us.
Okay.
Have a lovely night. Thank you. This meeting is adjourned at 9:51. Thank you so much for all of you that stuck this out. We are now going to have a 5-minute recess. All in favor?
Yeah.